The wind howled through the courtyard of the Red Keep, a sound that seemed to stretch and scrape along the walls, like some restless ghost. Brienne of Tarth stood at the edge of a narrow window's arch. Her broad shoulders hunched as she peered out across the city. King's Landing was quiet in the moonlight. A deceptive hush, as if the entire city held its breath in anticipation of the storm that seemed poised to break at any moment. She was tense, too aware of the dangers lurking in shadowed corridors. Though she had fought in battles and witnessed all manner of brutality, she could not escape the soft tremor that ran through her whenever she thought of what lay ahead tonight. She had to steel herself more than once. The memory of her oath weighed heavily on her. An oath to protect the weak. An oath to uphold honor. An oath to serve those who could not serve themselves. She had once believed those vows were as straightforward as lifting a sword to defend a cornered innocent, but in the labyrinth of King's Landing intrigue, she found that her sense of duty was tested at every turn. Nothing was simple here. Sworn knights might become assassins overnight, or queens might become exiles in the blink of an eye. People wore secrets like armor, and illusions became as powerful as steel. Brienne tried to keep her code unsullied, but the city had a way of staining even the purest intentions with the muddy footprints of betrayal. She let go of the windowsill. Her gloved hands had begun to ache from gripping the stone so tightly. In the cold hush of the corridor behind her, she could hear faint murmurs, the low voices of Lannister guards stationed by the far staircase. She was no friend to the Lannisters, although Jaime had once belonged to that house by both name and blood. Jaime Lannister, the man she had grown to respect. Nay, care for. Against all expectation. Perhaps that was why she was here, skulking in these corridors in secret, risking her life for a final confrontation that could easily see her head removed from her shoulders. She did not relish the thought of causing Jaime grief, but her purpose tonight would not be swayed. She had not come for Jaime, she had come for Cersei. An oath, she told herself again. A promise to the dead. A promise that evil would not forever reign. In the dim torchlight, Brienne surveyed the corridor. She had memorized these paths from her previous time in the Red Keep, but so much had changed. Stones looked older, cracks more pronounced. Torches were fewer in number, placed more sporadically, as if the castle no longer had the wealth or will to keep them all lit. It was as if the keep itself was dwindling, losing vitality. Or perhaps the darkness that surrounded Cersei's rule had seeped into every nook and cranny. Brienne slipped forward carefully, avoiding the direct glow of the torches, pressing herself against the cold stone walls. Her armor was padded so as not to clink with each movement, but she still felt as though her mere presence might echo. She took a moment to calm herself, remembering that she had faced men twice her cunning, thrice her ruthlessness. A queen was just another mortal, even if that queen's name still carried fear. Cersei Lannister. Even the name conjured the taste of bitterness. Brienne could recall the old stories. Cersei, golden-haired and cunning, the queen who had tried to keep the Iron Throne in her grasp with tooth and nail. Tales that had turned from admiration to scorn as her sins piled high. She remembered how Lady Sansa had trembled whenever Cersei's name was mentioned. How Margaery had tried to navigate that viper's nest with a politician's charm, only to be devoured. Brienne remembered seeing Cersei's face in the throne room, the face of a woman whose beauty had turned almost to stone. Each cruelty another chiseled line in her features. The last she had heard, Cersei had lost most of her children, and with them, any last vestiges of compassion. The queen clutched at power like a drowning woman clutches driftwood, and that made her more dangerous than ever. Brienne pressed on, passing shuttered windows that let in thin slices of moonlight. Her boots made soft echoes on the stone floor. She nearly stumbled when a door to her left opened with a soft creak. Quick as a cat, she flattened herself against the wall in the darkness. A single figure emerged. Some court functionary, stooped with a ledger tucked beneath his arm. He looked exhausted, face pallid in the faint torchlight. He shuffled away without noticing her, muttering under his breath about the hour. Brienne relaxed once he was gone. The tension in her shoulders eased, but only slightly. These corridors were never safe. She reached a wide staircase, spiraling downward. At the bottom, she knew, lay a corridor leading to the queen's private apartments. Cersei had always been fond of retaining the regal chambers near Maegor's Holdfast, close to the throne room. Though it was rumored she spent more time among her stash of wildfire than truly governing these days. Brienne's lip curled slightly in distaste. It was just like Cersei to remain in the seat of power even as all else crumbled. Still, the knowledge of her whereabouts served Brienne's purpose well. She gripped the hilt of Oathkeeper at her side. The sword's name brought back memories of the day Jaime had presented it to her. A gift forged from Ned Stark's sword, ice, a sign of Jaime's trust, or perhaps the beginnings of his redemption. She prayed it would guide her now. Her boots moved methodically, step by step, down the winding staircase. She remained alert to every shift of shadow, every hint of footsteps. At the bottom, she found the corridor lit by a single sconce. She could smell dust and dampness. A few flickering torches lined the walls, their flames dancing, as though unsettled. The battered tapestries on the walls depicted old Targaryen conquests. Drakes spouting fire, knights kneeling in forced fealty. They seemed ominous in the unsteady light, reflections of another time that had known just as much bloodshed. She turned a corner and almost collided with a guard. He was leaning against the wall, half asleep. A man well past the prime of a typical soldier, probably kept around because the Lannisters were running out of men who truly believed in their cause. Or maybe he was simply incompetent. Brienne held her breath, watching his eyes flutter open and closed, drifting in that hazy domain between wakefulness and slumber. She saw the shadow of a bottle on the floor beside him. Wine. No wonder his guard was lowered. Still, she waited, pressed against the wall, until she was certain he wouldn't stir. Slowly, carefully, she moved past him. Any misstep that caused her armor to clank could result in a sword at her throat. She made it by him undetected, heart pounding. Her goal was simple, and yet so tangled. Could anything in this city be simple anymore? Once, she had tried to avoid violence unless it was absolutely necessary. She had come to King's Landing now under the impetus of a rumor that Lady Sansa's safety might be in jeopardy. An agent close to Cersei had gleaned the Stark girl's location. Brienne's vow to protect Sansa echoed in her mind. She remembered her vow beneath the old weirwood, how the cracks in her heart had healed a little when she found a purpose worth living for. If Cersei had discovered that purpose or sought to use it, then Sansa was in grave peril. For that reason alone, the time had come for Brienne to deal with the Queen. If Sansa were to remain safe, Cersei's designs must be ended. Permanently. She approached a pair of thick oak doors. A Lannister sigil had once been placed here in gold filigree, but now it was chipped and peeling, as though the castle itself was rejecting it. Brienne paused. Beyond those doors lay the labyrinth of antechambers leading to Cersei's personal suite. She recalled from overheard tidbits that Cersei's bedchamber was at the innermost portion, heavily guarded. Killing the Queen in a straightforward manner would be near impossible. And yet, that was precisely her task. She knew that once she committed to this course, she could not turn back. If she failed, she would die. If she succeeded, the realm might brand her a kinslayer's accomplice or an assassin. But the realm's condemnation mattered little if it meant protecting Sansa and fulfilling her duty. She slipped her fingers under the iron handle, and with painstaking caution, pushed the door open just enough to see inside. An antechamber, empty, its hearth coal. A single lantern glowed from a table, illuminating the dust in the air. She slid inside. The door gently closed behind her with a soft click that seemed deafening. Her hand hovered near the hilt of Oathkeeper again. She felt more vulnerable here than in any open battlefield. A pitched fight was straightforward. Swing, block, parry? Trust your skill and hope for an honorable foe. But this was infiltration in the dead of night. It tasted too much like dishonor. But what choice was left to her? She edged around the room, moving slowly, taking in every detail. A few chairs, a desk with scattered parchments, a worn tapestry depicting House Lannister's golden lion. Its threads were frayed. A corridor led deeper into the suite, and she followed it. The next room was larger, a sort of lounge, with tall windows overlooking the moonlit rooftops of King's Landing. Dark curtains hung from the walls, and a single candelabra stood on a table made of polished oak. She could imagine Cersei entertaining guests here once upon a time, offering false smiles, honeyed wine, and sharper-than-serpents remarks. Now it seemed neglected, the cushions on the couches torn, the corners of the rug curled up as though no servant had tended to them for weeks. A faint noise made Brienne freeze. Footsteps on the other side of an ornately carved door. She recognized, with a stab of anxiety, that it must be the door leading to Cersei's bedchamber. She stepped behind one of the long curtains, pressing herself against the wall, heart hammering. The footsteps paused. Then she heard a woman's voice, low but tense, saying something in a rush. It wasn't Cersei's voice, but it carried a nervous lilt, as though the woman was frightened. Another voice answered, male, gruff. Then the voices receded, replaced by silence. Brienne exhaled. There was more activity in these chambers than she'd expected. If the timing was wrong, if there were more guards than she could handle, she might not even get close to Cersei tonight. She considered retreating, gathering more information, or finding a different approach. But time was not on her side. If the rumors were true, a raven could fly out at dawn to whichever spy had been dispatched to locate Sansa. But what? She had no illusions that Sansa was perfectly hidden forever. Cersei's web of informants was wide, and every day the risk grew. Delay could be catastrophic. She inched toward the door. Soft voices still slipped out from beneath. It sounded like an argument. She caught a mention of "Your Grace." That told her Cersei was inside. Brienne's pulse sped up. She tried to calm her mind, thinking of how she would handle multiple foes. She had never been a graceful dancer in tournaments, but her swordsmanship was disciplined, efficient, and strong. Against half a dozen men in an enclosed space, even she could be overwhelmed. But she sensed that patience might be her ally here. Wait until they parted, or until an opportunity arose. So she waited, hidden by the thick curtain, letting the minutes stretch. She closed her eyes briefly, recalling the swirling snow outside Winterfell, Sansa's distant face on the ramparts. That moment Brienne had sworn fealty, Sansa's trust, Lady Catelyn's memory. You have a true heart, my lady. Those memories fueled her resolve. She prayed that the gods, old or new, would see the justice in what she planned this night. Eventually, the voices intensified, and the door opened. Two figures stepped into the lounge. Brienne risked a glance. One was a young woman in plain but well-tailored clothes, likely a lady-in-waiting, her cheeks flushed with either anger or fear. The other was a tall guard in Lannister colors, though the lion on his surcoat was faded. The guard hissed some threat or admonishment, and the lady-in-waiting turned on her heel and swept out of the lounge, heading back to the outer corridors. The guard lingered a moment, shaking his head, then returned to the bedchamber, leaving the door partially ajar. Brienne's heart pounded. There was a chance now. She considered following the lady-in-waiting, perhaps capturing her quietly to glean information. But no, that would risk alerting others. Better to remain here. She gave the lounge a quick examination and spotted another door that likely led to a small side room. These royal apartments often had multiple connecting passages. If she could slip through a different route, maybe she could approach Cersei's chambers from an unexpected angle. She dashed quietly across the room, moving from shadow to shadow until she reached that side door. It was locked. She tried the handle gently, but it did not give. She frowned, scanning the lock by the light of the candelabra. Too sturdy for a quick break without noise. She inhaled and decided the direct route would have to suffice. She paused by the main bedchamber door, which was still ajar. She could hear low voices, though she could not discern words. Her heart thudded in her chest like a drum. She told herself that if she acted swiftly and decisively, she might dispatch the guard before he had time to raise alarm. That would leave her and Cersei. If fortune favored her, Cersei would be alone save for that single guard. If misfortune reigned, there could be more behind that door, waiting to swarm her like hornets. Yet, she reminded herself, she was no timid novice. She was Brienne of Tarth, a knight who had bested the Hound, who had fought off worse odds. She had been in the thick of it so many times. She looked at the hilt of Oathkeeper, gleaning its silent encouragement. This moment had been building ever since she'd left the north. Driven by a sense of duty larger than herself, she eased the door open. The bedchamber was lit by a pair of candelabras. Cersei's lavish bed draped with crimson sheets and lion-embroidered pillows. The queen herself stood by a small table, laden with half-drunk wine cups and scattered documents. She wore a fitted gown of dark velvet, her golden hair coiled in a heavy braid that draped over one shoulder. The shadows under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry, yet she still held herself with the regal posture of a monarch. Her face, once famed for its beauty, now bore lines of anger and bitterness etched deep around her eyes and mouth. The guard stood at her side, helmet under his arm, speaking in hushed tones. Brienne couldn't quite catch all the words, but it sounded like a report. Some matter of missing supplies, or a potential betrayal in the city. Cersei's mouth was a thin line as she listened. Then her eyes flicked up toward the door. For an instant, Brienne thought she had been spotted. She pressed herself against the wall, out of sight, barely breathing. Cersei's voice was clear as crystal when she spoke next. Then find out which of the merchants is cheating us. Put them in a cell until they talk, or feed them to the crows. Her tone was that imperial command, bored by the details yet swift with cruelty. I have no more time for these petty trifles. The guard gave a short bow. Yes, your grace. Her grace turned away, presumably dismissing him. Brienne waited for footsteps to approach the door, expecting the guard to leave. Instead, she heard only the shuffle of boots across the floor, and then a soft thump. Perhaps the guard was setting something down. A wave of frustration coursed through Brienne. She needed him gone. Every moment spent waiting was another chance for an unfortunate interruption. Then mercifully she heard the guard speak. "Shall I post someone outside the door, your grace?" "No," Cersei replied, voice tinged with her usual arrogance. "I want silence tonight. Only silence." "As you wish," the guard said. Brienne waited, each heartbeat a loud pulse in her ears. The guard walked to the threshold, and in a moment he emerged. She stepped back, pressed flat to the wall behind where the door would swing open. He didn't see her. He didn't even glance in her direction. Perhaps fatigue or complacency dulled his senses. In the flickering candlelight she could see him pause in the lounge for only a second, as though pondering whether to linger. Then he moved on, exiting the lounge door to the corridor. When the door closed, Brienne was left alone with Cersei, who remained in her bedchamber, presumably unsuspecting. Silence. Brienne exhaled slowly. Her hands trembled, and she clenched them into fists to quell the shaking. This was the moment. She pushed the bedchamber door open silently. The room smelled of stale wine and floral perfume. Cersei stood, hunched over the table, her back partially turned. Her posture was tense, as if she bore the weight of the realm on her shoulders, though Brienne suspected it was the weight of her own conspiracies. Brienne stepped in, closing the door behind her with painstaking softness. Cersei noticed nothing at first, engrossed in the documents. The flicker of candlelight danced over her hair. Brienne crossed half the distance. Her armor was muffled, but still she took care to keep her steps measured. She could see the curve of Cersei's cheek, the line of her brow. Memories collided in her mind. The time she had seen Cersei on the Iron Throne, face twisted with power, or the time she had glimpsed her in that humiliating walk of atonement, hair shorn, eyes burning with vengeance. Now, here she was. A cornered queen and a towering knight, both trapped in the darkness of fate. She was close enough now that she could see the tension in Cersei's shoulders. Another step, and she could take hold of her. But a floorboard creaked under her boot. Cersei turned swiftly, eyes wide, lips parted in surprise. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Cersei's face hardened. She reached for something, a small dagger that lay on the table's surface. Brienne drew Oathkeeper in one fluid motion, though she kept the blade low, not yet striking. Cersei's chest rose and fell sharply as she drew breath to speak. "Brienne of Tarth," she spat, as though the name itself was bile on her tongue. Brienne said nothing, her gaze locked on the dagger in Cersei's hand. The queen's eyes glinted. "I would have never expected you to stoop to sneaking into my chambers like some cutthroat. And yet here you are." Brienne kept her voice level. I have not come to trade insults, Your Grace. Cersei let out a humorless laugh. No, you've come to murder me. Or perhaps spirit me away to face your lady's justice, Is Sansa your lady? Or is it Daenerys? Or perhaps you serve only yourself? So many shifting loyalties these days. Brienne's grip on the sword tightened. She remembered how her sense of honor demanded she confront a foe face to face. Sneaking in might have been pragmatic, but it eroded the clarity of her conscience. Still, she held her ground. I am here because of the threat you pose. You've sought to uncover Sansa Stark's whereabouts. I cannot allow you to harm her. Damn Sano. Cersei's lips curled. So the little bird is still fluttering about. For years, I considered her not worth the trouble. But your presence here suggests otherwise. Her eyes flicked to the side, likely weighing the distance to the door, the feasibility of calling for help. Her voice softened into a dangerous purr. You do realize what will happen if you kill me here. My guards will swarm this place, and you will be executed within the hour. Whatever you hope to protect, you will have accomplished nothing. Namtarun. Brienne lifted Oathkeeper, the blade catching the candlelight. That is a risk I'm prepared to take. Cersei's nostrils flared, and in that moment, the hatred and fear in her eyes were almost palpable. She was cornered, but she would not cower. She raised her chin imperiously, though her grip on the dagger was white-knuckled. Of course you are. Brienne the Beauty, the woman who fancies herself a knight, honor-bound to some lost cause until the day she dies. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Was Jaime involved in this scheme? Or have you betrayed him as well? The mention of Jaime stung. Brienne fought to keep her voice steady. Jaime has made his choices. This is mine. Fool, Cersei hissed. She took a step sideways, as though circling. Brienne shifted as well, keeping her sword pointed. You think this will bring peace to the realm? Cutting down a queen in the dark like an assassin? She almost seemed amused. Have you learned nothing from the carnage of these wars? Another will rise. They always do. Then, perhaps, Brienne conceded. But you won't be among them. And with that, the tension snapped. Cersei lunged, the dagger aimed for Brienne's torso, a desperate strike. But Brienne's reflexes were honed from years of battle. She sidestepped deftly, her sword intercepting Cersei's blade with a clang. Cersei stumbled, her eyes widening. She was not an untrained woman, but she was hardly a match for Brienne in direct combat. Brienne grabbed Cersei's wrist, forcing the dagger aside, the metal scraping with a sickening screech against the table's edge. Candle wax spilled across papers. A goblet of wine tumbled over, staining the table. Cersei snarled, twisting like a cornered cat, but Brienne's strength was overwhelming. She wrenched the dagger free, sending it clattering to the floor. For a heartbeat, they stood with their faces mere inches apart, breath mingling. Brienne could see the terror behind Cersei's furious mask. She remembered how many lives had been destroyed at the hands of this woman, how countless innocents had suffered. A faint scuffle outside the door made Brienne turn her head slightly. A second of distraction. Cersei took advantage, clawing at Brienne's face with her free hand. She raked a sharp nail across Brienne's cheek, drawing blood. Brienne hissed, stepping back, and Cersei scrambled away, kicking the dagger across the floor to put distance between them. Now unarmed, Cersei's chest heaved. Her gaze darted toward a nearby door that presumably led to a smaller adjoining chamber. Brienne shook off the sting of the scratch, ignoring the blood trickling down her cheek. She bent to pick up the dagger, keeping her eyes on Cersei. It's over, she said calmly, though her heart thundered. She advanced, sword in one hand, dagger in the other. The queen retreated until her back hit the wall. She glanced around, but there was nowhere to run. Listen to me, Cersei said, her voice trembling, but laced with venom. You think you're so righteous. You're no different from the others. You want your enemy dead, you come in the night with steel. You pretend you're honorable, but you're a butcher just like the rest. Brienne froze, the blade poised. She wanted to deny Cersei's words, to proclaim that she was different, that she had come here because it was necessary to prevent more suffering. But her conscience roiled. Perhaps she was no different at this moment. Sometimes the line between justice and vengeance was razor thin. Her hesitation seemed to embolden Cersei. "Yes, that's right," the queen sneered. "You don't have the stomach for this. You'd rather posture about oaths and loyalty than deliver the killing blow. Go on. Prove you have the courage to do it. Or are you afraid to face what Jaime will think of you afterward?" The mention of Jaime again. Brienne flinched. She did not want to think of him finding her standing over his sister's corpse. She squeezed her eyes shut for an instant. Duty. Oath. The realm. Sense of safety. She pushed all personal anguish aside and opened her eyes, bringing the tip of Oathkeeper to Cersei's throat. The queen's breath caught. She pressed her head back against the wall, eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and desperation. "May the Seven curse you," Cersei spat. Before Brienne could answer, the door behind her slammed open. She spun, sword raised. A soldier in Lannister livery rushed in, sword drawn, confusion etched on his face. Cersei shouted, "Kill her!" The soldier lunged. Brienne met his blade, the impact jarring her arms. She parried twice, stepping away from Cersei so as not to be trapped between them. She had expected this. Perhaps she had even known from the start that it was inevitable she would have to fight. The soldier was skilled enough, but Brienne was no novice. She angled Oathkeeper and thrust, her blow deflected by a hastily raised shield. She spun, hooking her foot around the leg of a chair, kicking it toward the soldier to disrupt his footing. He stumbled, allowing Brienne to slash forward. Her blade cut across his surcoat, and with a second strike, she opened his throat. Blood sprayed over the stone floor, a crimson splash that darkened quickly. The soldier dropped, gasping his last breath. Cersei let out a strangled cry at the sight, pressing herself against the wall. "Guards!" she shrieked, her voice ringing through the chamber. "Help me!" Brienne grimaced. That would bring more any moment. Her chance to end this was slipping away. She turned to face Cersei, who was already bolting for the other door, the smaller adjoining chamber. Brienne dashed forward, grabbing the queen's wrist. Cersei clawed and writhed, but Brienne dragged her back into the bedchamber, ignoring the queen's panicked screams. They struggled, knocking over the table. The flame of a candle caught a piece of parchment, and a small fire sparked to life. Shadows danced wildly across the walls. Cersei kicked at Brienne's shin, her slippered foot lacking the force to do much harm. But the motion still jarred Brienne's stance. She forced Cersei onto the bed, pinning her arms. The queen's eyes flared with hatred, her lips drawn back in a snarl. "Traitorous wench," she hissed. But the bedchamber door was rattling. More guards were trying to enter. Brienne glanced back, hearing muffled curses. She didn't have much time. Gritting her teeth, she pressed the tip of Oathkeeper against the hollow at Cersei's collarbone. She felt the tremors coursing through Cersei's body. One thrust, and it would be done. Yet, she hesitated. Was there another way? Could she drag her out, force her to a trial? It seemed impossible. The door was already buckling under the weight of the soldiers outside. She had come here to do what must be done. But the taste in her mouth was bitter as gall. Cersei sensed the moment of indecision. She bared her teeth in a twisted smile. "You won't do it, will you? The Hound was right about you." Soft. Too honorable for a place like this. A loud crash drew their attention. The door splintered. Brienne could see steel points from the other side. If she delayed any longer, she would be overwhelmed and killed, and Cersei would walk free, unpunished, to continue her machinations. She pictured Sansa's frightened face, the promise she had made. The promise to Lady Catelyn. The promise to protect the innocent. All those knights' vows. It was all so tangled up in this single act. "I'm sorry," Brienne whispered, voice thick with despair. Then she drove Oathkeeper forward with a savage thrust. Cersei's eyes widened. A shudder passed through her entire body. The sword slid through cloth and flesh, a mortal wound. She made a wet choking sound, blood flecking her lips. Brienne felt her own heart lurch, her hand gripping the sword hilt so tightly that her knuckles ached. For all Cersei's evil, in that moment she was just a mortal woman, undone by her own pride and the unstoppable wheel of fate. Brienne yanked the sword free, staggering back. The queen slid off the bed onto her knees, clutching at the wound, her eyes never leaving Brienne's. 1,000 emotions flickered in those emerald depths. Rage, fear, disbelief. Then Cersei collapsed onto the floor, the crimson of her gown darkening as her blood spread beneath her. The final breath rattled from her lips, too soft to be heard over the pounding at the door. She was gone. Brienne stood panting, the sword in her hand dripping. Her cheek throbbed from the scratch. Smoke wafted from the smoldering parchment on the table. She felt as though the entire world had stilled, balanced on the cusp of oblivion. She had done it. She had killed the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. The door gave way with a mighty crack, and soldiers poured into the room, gasping at the sight of their fallen queen. A moment of stunned horror gripped them. Then they roared in fury, raising their swords, ready to avenge Cersei's death. Brienne braced herself. She had known this was a one-way mission, but she would not yield now. She was prepared to die. Yet in the back of her mind, she clung to a single desperate hope. That somehow, by the grace of the gods, she might escape and warn Sansa, or that Jaime might intervene. She lifted Oathkeeper, the bloodied steel gleaming in the firelight. The soldiers fanned out, cautious, but their eyes burned with hatred. She could hear shouts from the corridor. More men coming, perhaps a dozen. She didn't know if she had the strength to face them all. She stumbled to the side, adrenaline pounding in her veins, searching for any exit. The antechamber behind them might be blocked. The adjoining door on the other side was locked. She wondered if she might fight her way through the cluster of guards, or if she would simply perish here, her fate entwined with the queen she had just slain. A soldier lunged. Brienne parried, knocked him aside, but another came at her flank. She spun, her cloak swirling, smashing him in the face with the guard of her sword. The clamor was deafening. Steel ringing on steel, men shouting curses. She felt a blade snag on her armor, but it did not penetrate. She thrust out, feeling her sword bite into flesh. Another man fell, but more pressed forward, and she could hardly keep track of them all in the flickering light. The stench of blood and sweat churned her stomach. She fought with all the skill she possessed, stepping over the still body of Cersei Lannister, over the seeping pool of scarlet on the polished floor. Her breath came in ragged gasps. A blow jarred her left shoulder, sending a jolt of pain through her arm. She let out a pained grunt, retaliating with a slash that forced the attacker back. Another soldier tried to come at her from behind, but she twisted, raising Oathkeeper in time to block. Sparks flew from the clash. In the confusion, she spotted the door leading to the lounge. Perhaps if she moved quickly, she could slip past the men blocking it. She feinted left, sending two soldiers stumbling, then barreled right, knocking into a third. The man crumpled, and she dashed for the door. She heard a voice shouting behind her, "Close the door! Don't let her out!" But she reached it first, using her momentum to slam it open so hard it crashed against the wall. In the lounge, two more guards stood gaping. The same lady-in-waiting from earlier cowering behind them. Brienne did not want to hurt the woman, who looked terrified, so she lunged at the guards, crossing blades. They lacked the immediate coordination of the others, but they still put up a formidable defense. She fought desperately, every sense focused on survival. If she did not escape, all of this, her vow, the risk, would be for naught. She battered one guard's shield aside, thrusting up into his ribs. He let out a strangled cry. The second guard managed to land a glancing blow on her thigh, slicing through the armor's joint. She hissed in pain, but she clenched her jaw and countered with a savage downward strike that knocked him to the floor. Past them lay the corridor. More men rushed in from both directions, swords at the ready. Behind her, the knights from the bedchamber pressed forward. She was surrounded on all sides. Yet for a moment, none of them attacked, perhaps stunned by the sight of the blood-smeared warrior who had slain their queen. Brienne used that momentary hesitation. She turned toward one side of the corridor where only 3 soldiers stood. Better odds in the other direction, where a half-dozen formed a line. She raised her sword, ignoring the throbbing in her leg, and charged. It was a blur of screams and blades. She heard her name bellowed from somewhere, but she couldn't identify the voice in the chaos. Perhaps she imagined it. Her life distilled to each heartbeat, each clang of steel, each desperate lunge for the corridor's end. She knocked aside a spear aimed at her chest, then ducked the swing of a sword. She could feel warm blood trickling under her armor, not sure if it was hers or an enemy's. She kicked a soldier in the knee, sending him to the floor. Another came at her from the left, but she twisted away. Then, with a final shove, she burst past them, racing down the corridor, her breath ragged, her limbs trembling with exertion. Alarms rang through the halls. Shouts echoed off the stone walls. "She's killed the queen! Stop the knight!" Men clamored in pursuit. Brienne half ran, half limped, her thigh wound searing with agony. She had to find a route that led to the courtyard, or lesser-known passage. She prayed the Red Keep's winding corridors would offer her some fleeting sanctuary. Oaths or no oaths, she had no wish to die in a corridor, pinned under a tide of Lannister blades. She spotted a narrow staircase branching off to the left. One she recalled might lead to a small postern gate once used by servants. She veered that way, ignoring the burning protests of her muscles. Footsteps thundered behind her, shouts urging her to halt. She reached the stairs and descended, each jolt of her boots sending a lance of pain up her leg. The corridor at the bottom was dimly lit, abandoned. She pressed on, leaving a smear of blood against the wall where she steadied herself. A door loomed ahead. She hammered it open, emerging into a cramped courtyard seldom used by anyone of importance. The moonlight bathed it in a pale glow, revealing barrels and crates stacked near a gate. She could almost taste freedom, or at least the chance to slip into the city. But more footsteps sounded from her left, the glint of armor appearing at the courtyard's entrance. She clenched her teeth. If they cornered her here, it was finished. She glanced about, searching for any other route. A stone staircase on the right led to a battlement walkway. The gate itself was locked from the outside, likely. She saw no easy route. The soldiers spread out, swords raised, eyes filled with murderous intent. She wiped sweat from her brow, steadying her breath, ignoring the hot trickle of blood on her thigh. One of the soldiers, older than the rest, stepped forward. "Drop your weapon," he barked. "Come quietly, and maybe we'll let you live for questioning." The queen is dead," Brienne said, her voice echoing through the courtyard. She knew these men would not let her live. Their eyes told her everything. She raised Oathkeeper once more, the blade reflecting moonlight in a ghostly sheen. "If you want me, come and take me." In that suspended moment, with the hush of the city behind the Red Keep's walls, time seemed to slow. Brienne thought of every vow she had ever taken, every battle she had ever fought, every life she had tried to shield from injustice. She thought of Jaime, of Sansa, of all those who had told her she was too honorable for such a bloody world. Perhaps that was true, yet here she was, standing amidst the consequences of a decision no more palatable than the alternatives. She had killed Cersei Lannister. Now, she stood on the brink of her own doom. The soldiers advanced, steel scraping on stone, forming a semicircle. Her breath was a ragged whisper in the cold night air. With a last silent prayer to the gods, Brienne of Tarth prepared herself. She would fight with every ounce of strength left in her battered body, no matter how grim the odds. And so, under the pale moon, the towering knight raised her sword in defiance, the taste of blood and sorrow mingling on her tongue as the shadows closed in. "Oike." Brienne steadied her footing, even as her wounded thigh sent tremors of pain coursing upward with every subtle motion. The courtyard stretched around her like a stage under the moon's cold glare. Against the gray stone walls and piled crates, her pursuers formed a ragged semicircle, their blades reflecting hints of candlelit torches flickering from a far battlement. She could see the fury etched in their faces, men outraged by the sight of their dead queen, men who had sworn oaths of their own, now believing they fought in the name of vengeance. The hush of the moment held an uneasy promise of bloodshed. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, crows cawed softly, as if waiting for the feast. She gripped Oathkeeper so tightly that her fingertips threatened to go numb beneath her gauntlets. The blade felt heavier than ever, slick with blood. Her own breath came in ragged gasps, each exhalation visible in the chill of the night air. For a heartbeat, she caught her reflection in a soldier's shield. Her face spattered with crimson, her hair plastered with sweat, her eyes wide with determined terror. If she fell here, there would be no one left to warn Sansa of the web Cersei had spun. But at least Cersei herself was no longer a threat. That grim act, once only a possibility in her mind, was now a horrifying reality. There was no time to dwell on guilt or sorrow. She would have to face the next wave of violence and find a way to survive it. The soldiers advanced in cautious steps, each man wary of her skill. They had seen how easily she dispatched the others, but desperation fueled them now. The queen was dead, and for these men, the shock would soon turn to rage. The older one, who had spoken before, lifted his sword in a trembling hand and called out, "Murderer! Drop the blade, and we'll show you a merciful death. Resist, and we'll carve you limb from limb." His voice shook with emotion. She had no illusions that mercy would be offered in truth. Lannister men seldom gave quarter to those who butchered their liege, especially not in the hush of a courtyard where none could stay their wrath. Brienne tightened her jaw. If she was to escape, it would not be through surrender. A small voice inside her whispered that she might not escape at all, that every path led to the same ultimate sacrifice. Yet she squared her shoulders, forcibly calming her racing heart. When she spoke, her voice carried a measured authority she scarcely felt in her core. "Go, if you value your lives. I did what I must." A soldier on the far left spat on the ground. "She's stalling, kill her." He lunged forward. The others took his brash action as a cue, and suddenly the entire group pressed in. Brienne braced herself, sweeping her sword in a wide arc. The closest man jumped back, narrowly avoiding a blow that could have opened his chest. She felt the rush of their aggression like a wave crashing over her, and she struggled not to be enveloped by it. A spear thrust at her flank. She sidestepped, catching the haft with her offhand, wrenching it away. Another soldier aimed low at her wounded leg, forcing her to pivot to protect it. The pain flared, nearly causing her knee to buckle. They swarmed like wolves, each trying to exploit a blind spot. Her long reach gave her some advantage, and she managed to slash one soldier across the chest, sending him stumbling back with a cry. But then another came at her from behind, striking at her shoulder. The blow glanced off her armor, though she felt the powerful jolt of it down her arm. She spun, elbowing him in the face with a brutal crack. He fell, reeling. But more took his place. She had no time to think, only to react. Her world narrowed to sword arcs and footwork, her mind working frantically to keep track of where each threat materialized. Her breath came in sharp bursts, and sweat mingled with blood along her forehead. Metal clashed on metal, echoing loudly in the confined space. Grunts and curses from the soldiers blended into a maddening din. She managed another vicious cut, dropping a man who had tried to flank her. Then, something slammed into her side, just under her breastplate, punching the air from her lungs. She gasped, staggering a step, and realized it had been the blunt side of a halberd. Her ribs burned, but she kept her feet, bringing Oathkeeper up just in time to block a descending sword blow from a burly guard. Sparks flew. She pushed upward, forcing the soldier back, and kicked his knee. He collapsed, howling, and she drove her blade into his shoulder to keep him down. In the flicker of torches, she saw the older guard shouting and directing men behind her. Instinct warned she was about to be surrounded. She lunged for an opening between two soldiers, her massive frame barreling into them. They toppled like pins, allowing her a momentary gap. She glanced around, scanning for an exit. The postern gate was only 10 paces away, but she could see a thick chain and padlock glinting. She'd never break that in time. Her only option was to ascend the stone staircase to the battlements and hope to find a path along the walls. She remembered dimly that certain walkways led to a vantage over Blackwater Bay. If she was lucky, maybe she could descend from the ramparts further along the perimeter of the keep. With a low growl, she turned and pounded up the steps. The soldiers roared, rushing to follow. Each step was agony in her thigh, but she forced her legs to keep moving. At the top of the stairs, a narrow walkway stretched along the wall, lit by a single wavering torch in a bracket. The space between the waist-high parapet and the keep's ramparts was cramped. 2, maybe 3 men could fight abreast, but no more. That might work to her advantage if the Lannister men had to approach in a bottleneck. She turned, planting her feet, blade held at the ready. Below, several soldiers began climbing. Their angry shouts carried through the night. More men poured into the courtyard from the far gate, alerted by the ruckus. Brienne realized reinforcements would keep coming until she was surrounded at every turn. The first soldier crested the top step and swung. She parried, the clang of steel echoing across the silent rooftops of King's Landing. She forced him back with powerful overhead cuts. Behind him, another soldier tried to climb around. But there was little room to maneuver. She slammed the pommel of her sword into the first man's temple. He collapsed, sliding down the steps, tangling with the men below. That gave her a heartbeat to retreat further along the walkway. The flicker of the torchlight exposed glimpses of distant turrets and the sprawling city beneath. The rooftops shimmered with moonlight, and the sea of shadows stretched endlessly. Her thoughts flitted to the rumors that once dragons soared above these same walls. Now it was only her, forced to run while men gave chase. She moved sideways, keeping her sword raised, scanning for any sign of a ladder or a door that might lead deeper into the keep. She found none, just the continuous walkway that curved around. If she went far enough, she might find a guard tower leading down to the outer wards. The wave of her pursuers scrambled up the stairs after her, stoking her desperation. She couldn't outrun them indefinitely in this condition. She needed a moment's reprieve. But they were relentless, fueled by the fresh memory of the Queen's corpse. The older guard, spattered with blood from the skirmish, emerged at the top, barking orders to his subordinates. Brienne clenched her teeth. She'd advanced with a surge of aggression, hoping to cut him down quickly. The man angled his shield, absorbing her first strike, though it left a deep gash in the metal. 2 other soldiers converged on her left. She swept Oathkeeper across in a deadly arc, forcing them back for an instant. But then the older guard lunged, sword aimed at her midsection. She twisted, the tip grazing her cuirass, sparks spraying. She tried to riposte, but another blade came from the side, slicing across her upper arm. The cut burned. She grunted, forcing herself to ignore the pain, to keep fighting. The walkway was too narrow, her injuries too limiting. She realized she was one misstep away from being overwhelmed. She locked eyes with the older guard. Through the flickering shadows, she saw his grim determination. "You'll die for what you've done," he spat, voice thick with revulsion. "I hope the gods judge you harshly." Her voice emerged in a ragged whisper. "The gods are welcome to judge me. Now come on then, if you dare." Their swords clashed again and again, each impact jolting her wounded arm. A surge of dizziness threatened as she lost more blood, but she fought it down. A hammered blow to the guard's shield forced him to step back, though he was quickly replaced by a younger soldier with swift reflexes. The younger man slashed low, and Brienne barely managed to parry in time. She tried a counter-strike, but a second soldier jabbed at her side, and she had to wheel around, giving up precious ground. The parapet was at her back now, and she risked a glance over her shoulder. A dizzying drop into darkness. If she fell, she'd likely die on the stones below. Her heart hammered. The tension of the moment was suffocating, the roar of blood in her ears nearly drowning out everything else. She forced her focus back to the men pressing her from the front, hoping for any gap or weakness. But they had the advantage of numbers. One soldier could parry while another went for her flank. She blocked a thrust, then knocked aside a spear jab. But she couldn't stop a downward chop that caught her pauldron, biting through partially. Pain lanced her shoulder. She let out a muffled cry, her vision blurring from the shock. She had to move or die. Summoning a final burst of strength, she shoved forward, smashing her armored shoulder into the soldier who just struck her. He lost his balance and toppled sideways, his sword clattering to the walkway. Before the next blow could land, she pivoted, lunged past the older guard, and sprinted along the narrow stone path. The guards barked curses, stumbling behind her as she forced them to scramble over their fallen comrade. She didn't look back, didn't slow. Each pounding step sent agony through her injured leg and battered torso. Her breath whistled in her throat, and she tasted blood. She couldn't be sure if it was from a cut lip or something deeper. Ahead, the walkway curved around the keep's perimeter, passing under a tall tower. A wooden door on the tower's flank beckoned like a slender hope. She reached it, fumbling with the latch, praying it wasn't barred from the inside. The door yielded, opening into darkness. She nearly fell in, catching herself on the threshold. Her pursuers were only steps behind. She slammed the door shut and dropped a heavy wooden brace across it, a makeshift barrier that might slow them briefly. The soldiers pounded on the other side, shouting for her blood. Inside the tower, the air was stale, smelling of old straw and mildew. Narrow windows let in faint moonlight, casting pale stripes across stone steps. She leaned against the wall, struggling to catch her breath, every inch of her body throbbing with pain or exhaustion. Her mind flickered with the image of Cersei's final moments. Blood on her lips, eyes full of fury. She forced the memory aside, focusing on survival. She could hear the guards outside hacking at the door, their swords banging on the wood. She knew that the barrier would fail soon. She staggered forward, climbing the spiral steps. Her wound dripped blood onto the stone, leaving a telltale trail. The tower's interior was cramped, the walls lined with cobwebbed arrow slits and the occasional battered torch sconce. She cursed under her breath. No torch was lit, and she dared not pause to fumble for flint. Darkness pressed in. She gripped the banister for balance, each step a battle. The world swam at the edges of her vision, a combination of lost blood and adrenaline. She had to keep going. If the top of the tower offered a vantage to the city or another route, maybe, just maybe, she could slip away. Below, she heard the crash of wood as the door gave in. The echo of boots filled the tower, accompanied by a rising clamor. They were coming, and they would be on her in seconds. She forced her legs to move faster, hating how they trembled beneath her weight. Her breath came in ragged bursts that sounded painfully loud in the enclosed space. She couldn't hide here. There was nowhere to go but up, or down into the arms of those who would gut her. She emerged onto a narrow landing. A short hallway led to another door. She flung it open, stumbling into a small chamber lit by a single lantern. By that scant illumination, she discerned old furniture, broken chairs, a table half rotten, crates stacked haphazardly. Dust motes swirled in the air. There appeared to be a second door on the far side, possibly leading out to another section of the battlements. She took 2 steps toward it, then froze at the sound of movement from within the chamber. A figure rose from behind the crates, eyes wide with alarm. A young man dressed in scuffed leathers, an improvised weapon, some sort of sharpened iron rod, clutched in his hands. He stared at Brienne as though she were a specter from a nightmare, which, to be fair, she nearly was in her blood-stained armor, sword still in hand. She realized with a jolt he was probably a petty thief or a deserter, seeking a place to hide in this neglected corner of the Red Keep. Their eyes locked for an instant, each uncertain whether the other posed a mortal threat. The shouts and pounding boots from the staircase below drew his attention. He flicked a terrified glance at the door, then looked back to her. Fear warred with caution in his expression. She took a shaky breath. If she wasted time in a fight, the soldiers would overtake her. "I have no quarrel with you," she managed to say, voice raw. "Don't hinder me and I won't harm you." He gulped, nodding rapidly, retreating behind the crates. He must have sensed the lethal determination in her stance. The noise from below grew louder, footsteps nearing the top of the stairs. Without waiting for further negotiation, Brienne limped across the chamber, shoved aside a dusty trunk, and reached the second door. Locked. She muttered a curse, checking for a bar or latch. Her eyes raked over the door's iron fittings. They were rusted but sturdy, probably sealed from the other side. She rattled it, but it wouldn't budge. Behind her, the intruder cowered, eyeing the hallway. She spun as she heard voices and the scrape of boots at the top of the stairwell. They were here. She had only seconds before they discovered her. She pressed herself against the wall near the door, choking down her pain, forcing her pulse to steady. The thief or deserter remained half-hidden, trembling. In the lantern's dim glow, she could see his cheeks were sunken, his clothes ill-fitting. Likely someone who had nowhere else to go, perhaps once a servant or stable hand, living now in the shadows of the castle. She gave him a final glance, silently warning him not to cry out. A soldier burst into the room, sword drawn. By the torchlight from the stairwell, she recognized the lion sigil on his tabard. His gaze swept the chamber, and he spotted her at once. She lunged, driving Oathkeeper forward before he could shout an alarm. The blade pierced his throat. His eyes went wide, blood bubbling from his lips. He toppled, dropping the torch. It hit the floor, sputtering embers that threatened to catch the rotting wood. She clenched her jaw, pulling the blade free. The stolen moment of silence wouldn't last. The next wave of men would notice his absence and come crashing in. She realized the final option was to go back the way she came and try another route. But that was as good as running headlong into a hornet's nest. She scanned the ceiling, the walls, any other hidden way out. The only possibility was a small window near the far corner, a narrow slit designed for archers. It overlooked some portion of the keep's outer wall, but from here, it was hard to see the ground. The opening was much too small for her to pass through fully armored. Still, it might be her only chance. The footsteps grew louder in the hallway, multiple voices shouting to check the room. Brienne had no time for second thoughts. She tore off the battered cloak around her shoulders and dropped her scabbard. Leaving her sword arm free, but accepting, she might have to abandon the scabbard if she squeezed through. She limped to the window, hoisted herself onto the sill, and tried to gauge the drop. The darkness made it near impossible to see how far below the courtyard or rampart lay. She swallowed hard. If it was too far, or if there was only bare stone below, she could break her legs or worse. But the alternative was certain capture. She used her free hand to scrape away at the edges of the window's masonry, making room for her broad shoulders. Her armor clanked, catching on the stone. She grimaced, forcing herself forward. She barely fit. Her armor plates groaned against the opening. She had to tilt sideways, pressing her chest to the rough stone, her cheek scraping the wall. The wound on her arm throbbed, and hot blood trickled down to her elbow. Behind her, the door burst fully open, and more soldiers flooded the chamber. She heard them exclaim at the sight of the fallen comrade. One cried, "There! She's going through the window." She forced herself to move faster, feeling their presence like a storm at her back. She swung one leg out, then the other, trying to slide through. Her armor jammed. She heard footsteps rushing behind her. She pushed desperately, ignoring the pain, twisting her hips to squeeze through. A soldier grabbed her ankle. She kicked back, her boot striking his face with a solid crunch. He let go, cursing in agony. She felt hands claw at her left leg again, nails scraping across her calf armor. Desperate, she pulled her entire body weight forward, letting gravity help. The narrow stone tore at her side, but at last her body slipped through. For a split second, her stomach lurched as she realized there was only empty air beneath her. Then she tumbled down, hitting a sloped wooden awning not far below with a bone-jarring crash. The awning groaned under her weight, half collapsing. She slid, her chest and arms scraping broken shingles, before rolling off the edge and dropping onto another walkway. She landed hard, her knees buckling, armor clanking. The impact drove the breath from her lungs, and she gasped, seeing spots of color dance in her vision. For a moment she was sure she'd broken something. Her wounded leg screamed in protest. Her ribs burned, but her limbs still obeyed her, somehow, albeit stiffly. From above, the soldiers shouted. She saw a torchlight flickering at the tower window. She forced herself to her feet, hissing at the pain. She found herself on a lower rampart near the southwestern side of the Red Keep, if her memory served. The walkway ran along the inner wall, overshadowed by higher battlements. In the distance, beyond a broad yard and more walls, she could glimpse the faint glimmer of the Blackwater Rush. She tried to orient herself, leaning against the wall for support. The environment was dimly lit by the city's scattered lights and a handful of torches mounted on corners of the ramparts. If she could circle around and find a postern or a sally port, she might slip out into the city proper. But the commotion had likely alerted all of the guards. Everywhere, the cry would be the same. "Stop the murderer of the queen." She pressed a hand to her side, wincing as she felt fresh blood on her fingertips. Footsteps on the walkway behind her. She turned, sword in a shaky grip. A lone guard sprinted toward her, perhaps dispatched from another station. He caught sight of her blood-stained figure and faltered. But only for a moment. He charged, shouting. She steadied herself, blocking his swing. The force of it nearly jarred the sword from her weakened arm. She gritted her teeth, twisted her wrist, and slashed across his thigh. He screamed, tumbling to the ground. She left him alive, for she could not afford more delays. She needed every precious second to flee. She stumbled onward, half running, half limping, staying close to the parapet's edge. Shouts echoed over the stone. Far below, she saw torches gathering in the outer ward. Archers, perhaps, or more soldiers forming a perimeter. They meant to trap her inside. She would have to be clever. Maybe she could find a vantage to climb down to the lower walls or slip into a corner of the keep. The entire fortress was a labyrinth, but she'd spent enough time in King's Landing to know there were secret nooks and half-forgotten alleys, even within the Red Keep's perimeter. She spotted a section of the wall in disrepair, where scaffolding had been erected to do long-overdue maintenance. Wooden platforms and ropes hung along the outer face, leading down toward a storeroom near the base. It was dangerous, but in her current predicament, it might be the only way. She hurried that way, ignoring the stabs of pain. The scaffolding shuddered when she stepped onto it, her armor creaking with each movement. She heard more voices from behind, men calling out her location. She descended one level, then moved along a rickety plank. Plumes of dust billowed, and the entire structure wobbled precariously. Any slip might send her hurtling to her death. She clenched her jaw, stepping carefully. A sudden whistle split the air. She froze. An arrow thudded into the wooden beam inches from her face. The vibration rattled her teeth. She glanced up. Sure enough, archers on a distant battlement had loosed shots. She dropped to a crouch, inching forward along the plank. Another arrow whipped by, clattering off her pauldron. The jolt nearly knocked her from the scaffolding. Splinters of wood rained down. She pressed herself flat, trying to use the scaffolding's meager rails as cover. One more arrow zipped overhead. She waited, heart pounding. Silence. They were re-knocking or shifting position. She seized the lull, crawling further along the scaffolding, until she reached a wooden ladder that led down another story. She descended as swiftly as her injuries allowed, sweat mixing with blood, her breath ragged. The archers resumed firing, but now their angle was worse. The scaffolding partially obscured by the keep's architecture. Arrows rattled off stone and wood, but most missed their mark. At last, she reached the lower level near the base of the wall, stepping onto a small walkway that led to a stout iron-bound door. It might lead to storerooms or an armory, she wasn't sure. She tugged on the handle. Locked. Ducked. She growled in frustration. Behind her, the scaffolding trembled. She risked a glance upward. At least 3 soldiers were descending the same path, grimly determined. She could see the glint of their helmets. She had to move. She scanned the immediate area. On the far side, the walkway overlooked a short drop into an enclosed yard. If she jumped, she might land poorly, but it was a lesser risk than staying. She limped to the edge, peering over. The yard below was cluttered with barrels, broken carts, and scattered debris. Perhaps 20 feet down, a drop that could easily snap an ankle if taken unwisely. But the soldiers were nearly on the same platform. She had no choice. She secured Oathkeeper with a shaky grip, took a deep breath, and leapt. The moment of freefall seemed to stretch endlessly, her stomach lurching. Then she hit the ground hard, her legs folding beneath her. Pain exploded in her wounded thigh, and she tumbled sideways, landing in a heap of splintered wood. White-hot agony flared in her side. She almost blacked out, every breath ragged. For several heartbeats, she lay there, struggling against unconsciousness. The moan that escaped her lips was soft, almost lost in the shuffle of her armor. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself to roll onto her knees, pushing upright. Her left arm dangled uselessly for a moment, the shoulder too bruised to lift without searing pain. But she clung to Oathkeeper like a lifeline. A wave of dizziness threatened to topple her again, but she fought it down. Surrender would mean death, or worse, captivity at the hands of men who wanted to see her suffer for their queen's murder. Somehow she regained her feet. The yard was enclosed by a tall fence and the looming keep walls. A single gate led out, an old wooden structure reinforced with iron bands. She hobbled toward it, each step sending shocks of pain up her leg. She heard the soldiers overhead cursing when they saw she had jumped. Someone shouted, "Surround the yard!" The sound of boots scurrying on stone echoed from all around. When she reached the gate, she tugged on it and found it barred from the inside. Luckily for her, she fumbled for the latch, found the heavy wooden beam. It took all her remaining strength to lift it, the wound in her side pulsing with fresh blood. Finally, the beam dropped away and she shoved the gate open. She emerged onto a narrower lane within the Red Keep's outer wards. To her left, she thought she saw a path leading to the main stables. To the right, a slope climbed toward the castle's southern ramparts. She recalled that somewhere near the stables was a small postern that once led down to the harbor. If she could find a horse, or even slip out on foot, she might vanish into King's Landing's dark alleys. She half ran, half lurched along the lane, scanning for any sign of pursuit. Shadows stretched ominously between the flickering torches. The keep was in turmoil. Horns began to blow an alarm, a somber call that resonated across the rooftops. She knew then that the entire fortress would be alert, and soon the city as well. Her time was measured in moments. She passed a cluster of storage sheds, hoping to remain hidden in the gloom. But a group of Lannister guards burst into view at the end of the lane, blocking her path. At least 5 of them, armed with spears and swords. They spotted her instantly, raising the alarm with triumphant cries. Without pausing to think, she ducked between 2 sheds, finding an alley that reeked of damp straw and rotting refuse. The ground beneath her was muddy, possibly from a burst water barrel. She slipped, but grabbed a protruding timber to stay upright. Behind her, the guards raced to intercept. She pushed on, stepping over toppled crates. A rat scurried away at her approach, squeaking in protest. The alley curved around, depositing her near another yard. Every corner was an unwelcome surprise, each yard a potential trap. She could hear men shouting from multiple directions. She could practically feel the net tightening around her. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with an old stable hand carrying a pitchfork. The man gaped at her, this tall, bloodied knight who suddenly appeared in his path. She saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes, and he opened his mouth to shout. She grabbed the pitchfork and yanked it from his grasp, tossing it aside. He stumbled back, stumbling over a bucket. She had no quarrel with him. She surged past, ignoring the horror on his face. Perhaps he had recognized her only as a killer fleeing the scene of regicide. She couldn't expect pity, nor did she have the luxury to explain. A stable block loomed ahead. The smell of hay and horse sweat drifted through the night air. Lanterns hung from posts near the entrance, and she could make out the shapes of a few grooms moving about. If she could find an unguarded horse, she might gallop out of the keep's gates in the chaos. But even as that hope flared, she heard the clang of the main portcullis dropping somewhere in the distance, slamming shut in response to the alarm. Escaping the fortress itself would be no easy feat. She glanced over her shoulder. Pursuers were close, their torches flickering at the mouth of the alley, the ring of steel loud against stone. She limped into the stable yard. A startled groom shouted, "Halt!" She ignored him, pushing open a stall door, where a chestnut mare stamped nervously. The horse's ears pinned back, sensing Brienne's frantic energy. She tried to soothe it, but her hands were slick with blood, and her voice trembled. The mare shied away, whinnying. She cursed under her breath, stepping into the stall, forcing the horse to back up so she could grab a bridle from a hook. Her entire body trembled with pain and fatigue. She wrestled the bridle on, buckling it with clumsy fingers. Outside, the yard filled with men's voices. She heard the stable hand say, "She's in there." More boot falls. She realized she didn't have time to saddle the horse properly. She swung up onto the mare's back, ignoring the explosion of pain in her leg. The horse snorted, nearly bucking from the unceremonious mount. She clung to its mane, biting down a cry. Sensing danger, the mare shifted anxiously. With a firm yank of the reins, Brienne guided her out of the stall. In the stable's main aisle, 2 grooms jumped aside, eyes wide. No time for apologies. They emerged into the yard. At least 6 guards had arrived, swords drawn, forming a half-circle around the stable's exit. The mare skittered at the sight of them, hooves scraping the ground. She reared slightly, and Brienne fought to keep her seat, her injury screaming in protest. 1 guard approached, trying to grab the bridle. She kicked the mare's flanks, urging her forward. The horse charged, knocking the guard aside. Another soldier slashed upward, hoping to strike the rider, but Brienne leaned low, letting the blow glance off her gauntlet. She lashed out with her sword, cutting across the man's arm. He dropped his weapon, howling. With a desperate burst of speed, the mare thundered past the ring of guards, hooves pounding on cobblestones. A spear flew through the air, narrowly missing Brienne's shoulder. She ducked, hearing it clatter behind her. The stable yard flashed by in a swirl of torches and confused shouting. She guided the mare toward the main gate, but more guards stood in front of the portcullis, bristling with spears. No chance to break through there. She veered left, urging the horse down a side path that skirted the keep's outer curtain wall. The mare's eyes rolled with fear, and Brienne had to keep a tight rein to prevent it from bolting. A side gate might be somewhere along this stretch. She racked her memory for a route from the time she'd patrolled the Red Keep's perimeter. Most side gates would be sealed at night, but some might remain loosely guarded for servants. She heard horns again, a strident call that reverberated off the towers. The city below might soon be bristling with watchmen as well. She pressed on. Men leapt aside to avoid being trampled, some brandishing swords but too slow to strike effectively. The clatter of horse hooves and the mare's labored breathing filled her ears. She rounded a corner, coming into a courtyard overshadowed by a massive tower. The postern gate was on the far side. Brienne recognized the small iron gate set into the curtain wall. 2 guards stood watch. They looked alarmed at the sight of a galloping horse bearing a blood-soaked knight. Brienne lowered herself over the mare's neck, bracing for impact. The guards raised their spears, crossing them to block the gateway. She had no choice but to press the attack. With a cry that tore at her raw throat, she heeled the horse forward. The spears thrust up. She angled Oathkeeper and struck 1 spear aside, the clang jarring her arm. The other guard lunged, but the mare's momentum slammed into him, tossing him backward. 1 spear nicked the horse's flank, drawing a pained whinny, but the animal kept surging ahead. The gate was closed, but the wooden door looked weaker than the main portcullis. She could see an iron latch across it. She jerked the reins, halting the horse for an instant to hack at the latch with her sword. Sparks flew. The wood cracked. Another blow, and the latch splintered enough for her to kick the gate open with the mare's hooves. It swung outward, revealing a short tunnel that led to the outer edge of the fortress. Pale moonlight filtered in from beyond. Shouts behind her. Reinforcements flooding into the courtyard. Arrows whistled, clattering off the stone tunnel. She ducked low, spurring the mare forward. They thundered through the narrow passage, echoing in rhythmic reverberations. At the far end, an archway opened to a rocky slope, descending toward the city walls. A row of torches lined a switchback path, used by supply wagons. This was not the main approach to the Red Keep, but a secondary route seldom used. If she could get past the city watch station below, she might vanish among the labyrinth of King's Landing streets. The mare stumbled on the loose gravel, nearly pitching Brienne over its head. She tightened her grip, wincing as the motion jarred her side. She could already feel blood seeping through her armor's seams, warm against her skin, sapping her strength. The slope ahead was steep, and she had to slow the horse, guiding it carefully down the switchbacks. Behind her, she could hear men shouting near the gate. Torches flared in the tunnel. Soon, they would mount a pursuit of their own, or release archers to pick her off from above. She reached a flat landing halfway down. A guardhouse was set into the wall, a flickering lantern in the window. She expected a swarm of watchmen to burst out at any moment. Instead, only a single figure emerged, startled by the approach. He wore the colors of the city watch. Brienne gritted her teeth. He fumbled for his horn, presumably to raise an alarm. She pressed the mare on, drawing close. At the last moment, the guard dove aside, letting out a panicked yelp. He wasn't paid enough to throw himself under a rampaging horse, apparently. She galloped past, leaving him behind to scramble for his horn. Its bleat followed her down the path, a forlorn braying sound that carried across the city's rooftops. Below, King's Landing sprawled, cramped houses and winding alleys bathed in moonlight and the occasional lantern glow. Brienne focused on the gate in the outer wall that led to the streets. It was likely manned, but perhaps the confusion up at the keep hadn't fully reached them yet. Her best hope was to slip through quickly, using the darkness as cover. She guided the horse to the final turn, ignoring the burning ache in her muscles. Her mind raced with what came after. Even if she reached the city, she would be hunted. Every gold cloak would be on the lookout for a tall, wounded knight. She needed shelter, allies. But who in King's Landing would dare harbor the fugitive who slew the queen? A new wave of despair weighed on her. Her mission had been to protect Sansa, but now she was alone and bleeding, with half the city thirsting for her head. A final bend brought her to the base of the Red Keep's outer defenses. The gate there was open but flanked by watchmen. She saw them glance at one another, uncertainly as the horse pounded closer. A swirl of dust rose in Brienne's wake. One watchman stepped forward, hand raised in a command to halt. Brienne leaned low, urging the mare to maintain speed. They exchanged alarmed looks. One tried to grab for the bridle, the other started to lower a pike across the gateway. She kicked her heels, and the mare leapt forward, smashing through their attempt to block the passage. The watchman scrambled out of the way, cursing as the mare's hooves thundered past. She was through. The city lay ahead. A sloping district of tightly packed buildings and winding streets, descending toward the harbor. Lights glimmered in windows, and the faint hum of distant revelries or late-night toil lingered in the air. It seemed surreal. An entire populace going about its business, largely ignorant that their queen now lay dead, her blood soaking the stones of the keep. Brienne guided the horse down a broad avenue, ignoring the startled cries of any citizen still abroad at this hour. Her wounds pulsed with each jolt. She knew she couldn't ride for long in this state. She needed somewhere to hide, to bind her wounds, to regain her strength. But no name came to mind. She thought of the few scattered faces who might have once helped her, maybe a contact of Davos or someone loyal to the Starks. But so many had fled or disappeared in the endless chaos that had consumed the city over the years. She reached an intersection and slowed the horse to a trot, breathing heavily. The buildings around her loomed, crooked structures with shuttered windows. A few flickering lanterns illuminated the faces of passers-by, who stared in open-mouthed shock at the sight of this battered knight. She considered dismounting and slipping away on foot, but her leg threatened to collapse at any moment. The horse, too, was lathered with sweat and bleeding from the spear graze. Another few gallops, and the animal might founder. Suddenly, a clang of alarm bells rang out from a nearby watchtower. The city was waking to the crisis, and watch patrols would soon flood the streets. She spurred the mare down a smaller side street, pressing into the narrower roads where the high buildings nearly met overhead. Windows were shuttered, doors barred. The gutters stank of refuse. Drunken voices echoed from a tavern on the corner, oblivious to the strife outside. As she passed, a wide-eyed patron stepped out, took one look at her, and hurried back in, muttering a curse of disbelief. She turned another corner and found a stable yard behind a run-down inn. The sign overhead was too faded to read in the gloom. The yard was quiet, a single lantern flickering near the stable doors. She realized she couldn't remain in open streets. With a trembling sigh, she dismounted, nearly collapsing as her injured leg bore her weight. The mare panted, sides heaving. Brienne gently patted its neck in thanks. She led it to a corner of the yard, tying the reins to a post. She wished she could do more for the beast, but she had no time or strength to manage it now. She limped toward the inn's back door, sword still in hand. If it was unlocked, maybe she could slip in unnoticed. She tested the latch. It turned. She peered inside. A narrow hallway, poorly lit, leading toward a kitchen with a faint smell of stale stew. Her senses told her that forging ahead was a risk. Any occupant could raise the alarm if they recognized her. But if she didn't tend her wounds soon, she would likely pass out in the gutter. Summoning her last reserves of energy, she stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a soft click. The hallway was quiet, save for the distant murmur of voices from the common room. She moved carefully, mindful of every creak in the floorboards. Her breath came shallow and tight. Blood had dried on her cheek, forming a stiff mask that tugged on her skin when she blinked. Her arms and legs felt like lead. The door to the kitchen stood ajar, revealing a cluttered space with a low fire in the hearth. A single scullion dozed on a stool, head lolling forward. She slid past silently, relieved that he did not stir. At the end of the hall, she found a small storeroom. Shelves of dried goods and barrels lined the walls, the air thick with the scent of onions and flour. It was cramped, but it had a door that bolted from the inside. She slipped in and gently slid the bolt home. Then she let Oathkeeper clatter to the ground, swallowing a groan as she sank against a sack of grain. Her entire body trembled with exhaustion and pain. Darkness pressed at the edges of her vision. She fumbled with the straps of her gauntlets, wincing as her bruised and cut flesh protested every movement. At last, she managed to loosen them, letting them fall beside her sword. Next came her battered cuirass, which she unbuckled with trembling hands. It took tremendous effort to pull the plate away from her torso, each tug sending a spasm of pain through her wounded shoulder. Beneath the armor, her gambeson was soaked with sweat and blood, the fabric crusted and sticky. She grimaced at the sight of the wide crimson patches. Her thigh and upper arm had each taken nasty cuts, and her side bore a deep bruise that might mask a cracked rib. Any single one of these injuries would be enough to lay her low for weeks, but combined, they threatened to end her life if infection set in, or if she lost too much blood. Squeezing her eyes shut, she inhaled, focusing on her breathing. She had endured worse, or so she told herself. She recalled the savage beating and wounds she'd endured in her captivity by the bloody mummers, the time she had nearly died before Jaime intervened. That thought brought a renewed ache of regret. Jaime Toll. She dreaded how he would react to his sister's death. Now, her mind flickered between worry and heartbreak. Would he condemn her, or would he understand? Had she betrayed him by fulfilling what she saw as her solemn duty? It was too much to bear in that moment. She forced the thought aside, clinging instead to a single directive: survive. She needed bandages, water, something to stanch the bleeding. She looked around the storeroom, spotting a cloth sack. Inside were burlap sacks for onions, but she found a cleaner cloth that might serve as a makeshift bandage. She tore it with her teeth, ignoring the taste of dust. Working slowly, she bound the cut on her arm, tying the cloth tight to stop the flow. The process was agonizing. Each tug felt like a dagger twisting in her muscles. A wave of dizziness made her pause, panting. She blinked away tears of pain. At last, she managed to wrap her thigh as well, though the angle was difficult, and she had to stifle a cry when she pressed down on the torn flesh. She worried that she had not properly cleaned the wound, but she had no water or salve. Her best hope was to slow the bleeding until she could find proper aid. Sansa would scold her if she saw such crude bandaging, but Sansa was far away, hopefully safe. That thought spurred her on. She had to make sure it remained true. When the worst of the bleeding was contained, she slumped against the sacks, trembling. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy with exhaustion. The murmurs from the inn's common room mingled with the faint clamoring of distant bells. She realized she mustn't let herself fall asleep. If she lost consciousness, she might never wake again. But her body yearned for respite. She closed her eyes for just a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. In that brief respite, the memories assailed her. Cersei's final glare, the spray of blood, the frantic flight through corridors stained by her footfalls. She shivered, clutching at her sword's hilt for reassurance. She did not know how long she sat there in the half-darkness, battling against the tide of weakness that threatened to drag her under. Gradually, the noise in the inn died down, replaced by the muffled hush of late night. The scullion shuffled past the storeroom door once or twice, but no one tried to open it. Her head lolled forward, snapping back up as she fought to remain alert. She had to plan. She could not stay here indefinitely. Finally, she forced herself to stand. Her leg almost gave way, but she braced a hand on the shelves and managed to keep upright. She took a shaky step, then another. Each movement was a test of will. Slowly, she gathered her armor pieces, deciding she would have to leave some behind. The cuirass was too conspicuous. The cloak shredded and blood-soaked. She opted to keep only her sword, her dagger, and a smaller piece of chainmail for her torso that might be easier to conceal beneath a cloak if she found one. She checked the door, listening. Silence. Perhaps the staff had gone to bed. She slid the bolt, opened the door a crack. The hallway was dark. She crept forward, following the path back to the kitchen. The embers in the hearth had died down. The scullion was gone. She spotted a half-filled pot of water on the table. Taking a risk, she dipped her hand in, gulping from her palm. The water was stale, but it soothed her parched throat. She winced, wishing she could wash her wounds properly, but that would require more time and far more water than she could afford. She settled for rinsing the blood from her hands as best she could, then swallowing another handful of water. She continued through the kitchen, carefully opening the door that led to the common room. It was dark, only a few candles guttering in sconces. A few drunk patrons snored at tables, a bored serving girl dozing in a corner. The air stank of stale ale and spilled stew. Brienne's presence might still spark alarm if someone woke, but stealth was her best ally now. She needed only to cross the room to the exit near the front. She moved carefully among the tables, biting her lip whenever her leg threatened to fail. Her sword, she held low and turned so it would not gleam in the candlelight. She passed close to a sleeping man who reeked of sour wine. He mumbled something in his sleep, but did not stir. Relief flickered in her chest. She kept going, reached the door. It opened with a soft click, revealing the inn's front porch. A single lantern burned outside, illuminating the empty street. She stepped out into the night. The chill air was bracing against her perspiring skin. Though it might have been the hour before dawn, the city still had pockets of activity, mostly watch patrols. She heard distant footsteps, the occasional shout. She slipped into the shadows beside the inn, adjusting the chainmail beneath a ragged shawl she'd snatched from a hook near the door. She hoped it would conceal the worst of her injuries and keep her face partially hidden. Her next steps would determine everything. If she could find a safe house or a sympathetic contact, someone who would not turn her over to the Lannisters for a bounty, she might survive long enough to heal. Then, in time, she could figure out how to protect Sansa, how to see that the realm did not collapse in the wake of Cersei's death. Everything teetered on a knife's edge. She inhaled, wincing at the pain in her ribs, and began to walk. Every street brought new risks. Watchmen patrolling with lanterns, suspicious eyes peering from windows, the possibility of being recognized by someone who had seen her face on the Red Keep's walls. She kept to side alleys, ducking behind crates or doorways whenever a patrol passed. Her leg throbbed with every step, threatening to buckle. Yet she pressed on, clinging to the determination that had guided her all this way. At one point, she heard a group of watchmen discussing the Queen's murder. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones. One said, "A tall knight, they say, built like an ox, wearing dark armor. Must have had help to get so close to the Queen. A spy in the keep, no doubt." Another responded, "Half the Lannister men in the keep are furious. They'll tear the city apart searching for that knight." Their voices faded as they moved on. Brienne shivered, imagining the chaos her act had unleashed. The realm would tremble at the news of Cersei's death, every house watching for advantage or seeking vengeance. She found a deserted corner near a crumbling wall, pausing to catch her breath. Sweat beaded her brow, and she felt faint. She slid down against the wall, closing her eyes, letting the cold stones support her. For a moment, she feared she might pass out right there in the street. But a cat mewed nearby, startling her. She forced her eyes open, blinking at the darkness. She reminded herself she had to keep moving. With a soft groan, she pushed to her feet, leaning on the hilt of her sword for balance. Ahead, she spotted a sign with a crescent moon painted on it. Likely another small tavern or boarding house. She considered if she dared approach. If the proprietor recognized her or saw she was wounded, he might turn her in for a reward. But if she kept walking aimlessly, she'd likely collapse and be found by the watch anyway. She hesitated in the shadows, weighing the risk. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her mind, dulling her instincts. Then she heard boots on the cobblestones behind her. A patrol? She pressed herself into an alcove, heart hammering. Two silhouettes strode by, one carrying a lantern. She heard them murmuring about a lockdown at the gates. If the city gates were sealed, that meant she was truly trapped in King's Landing, with nowhere to run. She closed her eyes, inhaling shakily. She had to find sanctuary somewhere within these walls, at least until the initial frenzy died down. She glanced up at the sign again and made her choice. Limping forward, she tested the door. Unlocked. She slipped inside, finding a modest front room with a desk and a single candle burning. A young boy dozed behind the desk, a ledger open in front of him. The place smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and lamp oil. The boy stirred at the sound of her steps, blinking in confusion. She saw the fear in his eyes the moment he took in her size, the drawn sword, the blood staining her clothes. Before he could cry out, she raised her free hand, attempting a calming gesture. Her voice emerged rasping. "I have silver. Please. Just a room. I need a place to rest. I won't cause trouble." The boy hesitated, clearly torn between his instinct to flee and the possibility of earning coin. She tugged at a small pouch on her belt, managing to retrieve a few battered coins, what little remained of her purse. She placed them on the desk, her hand shaking. The boy glanced down at them, then up at her battered face. Whatever he saw there, desperation, or perhaps sincerity, persuaded him to nod. He stood, beckoning her to follow, leading her up a narrow flight of stairs that creaked under her weight. On the second floor, he showed her to a tiny room. The door squeaked open on stiff hinges, revealing a straw pallet, a chipped basin on a rickety table, and a single shuttered window. It was meager, but it was shelter. She thanked the boy softly, her voice barely audible. He eyed her again, then slipped out without a word, closing the door. Brienne sank onto the pallet, pain racking her body. She set her sword within easy reach, glancing at the door to ensure the latch was sturdy enough that no one could burst in unannounced. Not that it would stop a determined group of soldiers, but it was better than nothing. The fear of betrayal gnawed at her. Perhaps the boy would fetch the watch. But she had little choice. Her strength was spent, and the odds of surviving in the streets all night were even lower. At least here she might steal a few hours of rest. Maybe enough time to plan her next move, or slip out when the city was darkest. Her wounds throbbed incessantly, and her head swam with exhaustion. She laid back, feeling every bruise and cut as though pressed beneath a millstone. The straw prickled against her battered limbs, but it was better than cold stone. She let out a shuddering breath, tears stinging her eyes, though she did not fully understand why. The swirl of emotion, guilt, regret, fear, resolve, became a tumult in her chest. She had killed Cersei Lannister. She had set in motion consequences she couldn't fully grasp. Yet she clung to one certainty: Sansa Stark was now safer, however marginally, for Cersei's schemes would never again threaten her. If Brienne's life was forfeit, at least her vows might endure in the safety they had purchased. That small solace was all she had left. Closing her eyes, she surrendered to the beckoning pull of sleep, sword at her side. For now, the hunt continued outside in the city's winding streets, torches flaring, men cursing, hounds sniffing for a trail of blood. But in this cramped room her breath slowed, and darkness swept over her. She slept with the knowledge that dawn would bring new perils, and that she would face them in the name of honor, even if the entire realm cried out for her head. Shah. Dawn broke with a pallid light that seeped through the narrow space between the shutters. Brienne stirred, groggy and disoriented, her body protesting in a chorus of aches and throbs. The straw pallet beneath her offered little comfort, and she felt the uneven lumps jabbing at her bruised ribs whenever she so much as breathed too deeply. Blinking, she raised her head. For a moment she did not recognize this cramped room, or the stale smell of boiled cabbage that seemed to cling to her clothes from the inn's kitchen. Then memory returned in a rush. Cersei's death, the frantic flight through the Red Keep's corridors, the city watch in pursuit, and her desperate scramble to find shelter in this dingy boarding house. Her immediate thought was to check if she still had her sword. She breathed a quiet sigh of relief to see Oathkeeper lying near her makeshift bed, its familiar hilt reassuring, even in its battered, bloodied state. She ran her fingers over the hilt's crossguard. It felt cold, a reminder of all that had transpired. Her arm and leg screamed in pain when she shifted. She glanced down to inspect the bandages she'd made. The cloth around her thigh was stiff with dried blood. The cloth over her arm had frayed around the edges. She could not tell if the wounds still bled beneath, but every movement reminded her that she was in no shape to run or fight. She closed her eyes for a moment, wrestling with the urge to let exhaustion take her again. But the longer she stayed in one place, the greater the risk that someone would discover her and summon the watch. The innkeeper or the boy at the front desk might already be plotting to sell her out. The coins she'd given were meager. Bounties for regicide, especially for killing Queen Cersei Lannister, would be far more generous. And yet, she had made it through the night unmolested. That alone felt like a blessing. Perhaps luck had not entirely forsaken her. Rousing herself with grim determination, she eased up onto one elbow, then forced her body upright. Pain flared from her side, causing black spots to flicker at the edge of her vision. She hissed through clenched teeth, bracing her hand on the rough wall for balance. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she'd hardly eaten since before the confrontation. Hunger made her head feel light, but she had neither coin nor time to linger over breakfast. She needed fresh bandages and a plan. The cloth scraps around her wounds might hold for a few more hours, but if she developed a fever, or if the cuts festered, she would be as good as dead anyway. She reached for her sword and used it like a cane to help her stand. A wave of dizziness forced her to lean against the wall until it passed. A voice in her head, sounding much like the late Maester Renfred of Tarth, cautioned her to rest or risk tearing her wounds open again. But rest was a luxury she could ill afford. The city would soon awaken in earnest, and with it, a surge of watch patrols. She needed to blend into the throng of streets if she wanted any chance of disappearing. When she felt steady enough, she fumbled with her chainmail. She had stripped off most of her armor the night before, but she still had a short hauberk she could pull over her ragged tunic, just enough to guard her torso from a stray blade. Every motion was torture. Her arms felt as though lead weights were attached to them. But she pushed through, swallowing back grunts of pain. Once she had the mail on, she retrieved the tattered shawl she'd taken from the inn's hall. It wasn't much, but she draped it over her upper body and head, hoping it would obscure her face and the glint of steel beneath. Her height was a liability, of course. Even stooped, she was likely to be noticed. But she might pass for a wounded sellsword or a traveler, if no one looked too closely. Finally, she propped Oathkeeper at her hip, adjusting the belt so the sword hung at an angle mostly hidden under the shawl. She cast a wary glance at the door. She had no illusions that stealth alone would guarantee her safety. One glimpse of her face, or a casual remark to the watch, and it could be all over. She had to move carefully and quickly, searching for a friend or ally in this treacherous city. The problem was, who could she trust? A faint memory surfaced. A blacksmith near Flea Bottom. A big lad named Gendry, once loyal to Davos and to the cause of the North. But Gendry had since become entangled with lords and lineages she barely understood. There were rumors that he'd been legitimized in some fashion. Would he still be in King's Landing? And if so, would he dare hide her? She shook her head, uncertain. Then she thought of other fleeting connections. Various tradespeople she'd encountered, some who might have offered kindness once. But that was all so long ago. The city changed with each new regime, and friends grew scarce under threat of the Lannisters' wrath. She pushed away from the wall, inhaled a slow breath, and unlatched the door as quietly as she could. The hallway beyond was dim. A single oil lamp flickered at the far end, and she heard the muffled sound of pots clanking downstairs, presumably the kitchen beginning its morning routine. She dreaded the prospect of encountering the boy or the innkeeper, but she'd have to risk it. She edged along, leaning heavily on her uninjured leg. When she reached the stairs, she paused, listening for voices. Faintly, she caught a murmur of conversation in the common room. Someone talking about last night's alarms at the Red Keep. She strained to hear. "Old keep locked down. Some say the queen's been killed. Others claim it was a demon. No, I heard it was a sellsword or maybe a bravo sea assassin." The voices mingled, weaving rumor upon rumor. Brienne realized the city was already seething with speculation, and the truth, if known at all, would be overshadowed by the swirl of gossip. People might not expect a tall female knight. Or perhaps they did. She could not let her guard down. Determined, she descended. The steps creaked alarmingly, but no one rushed to investigate. At the foot, she found herself in a short corridor leading to the front desk. The same boy from last night sat there, bleary-eyed, nibbling a crust of bread. He glanced up, nearly choking when he recognized her. She saw his hand flinch toward a bell on the desk. She shook her head once, raising a forestalling hand. His eyes were wide, darting. She pulled the shawl tighter across her face, hoping to look less menacing. Gently, she reached into her pouch and retrieved one more coin, a tarnished silver piece. She placed it on the desk without a word. The boy stared at it, then at her, as though unsure what fate he was inviting by accepting or refusing. His gaze flicked toward the door. Brienne tried to keep her voice low, calm. "I'm leaving now. You saw no one, understand?" He nodded frantically, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. He snatched the coin in trembling fingers and stuffed it into his pocket. She felt a pang of guilt, knowing the hush money would not guarantee his loyalty if fear overrode greed. But she had done what she could. She offered him a slight nod of thanks, then limped past into the common room. A pair of patrons at a table near the hearth looked up. Curious, but she kept her head down, letting the shawl cover her bruised cheek. She reached the exit in a few strides and slipped out into the morning light. The street was already stirring. Vendors pushed carts laden with vegetables and cheap trinkets, hoping to catch early customers. A ragged group of children rummaged through refuse, scrounging for scraps. In the distance she could hear the cry of a peddler hawking fresh eels and the dull clang of a smith's hammer. King's Landing had woken. Her heart pounded as she stepped onto the cobblestones, scanning quickly for any sign of the watch. She saw no cloaks of gold or black in the immediate vicinity, though that did little to ease her tension. Slowly, she began to move away from the inn, favoring the smaller alleyways whenever possible. Her leg burned fiercely. She pressed a hand against the bandage on her thigh, feeling the dampness of fresh blood where the cloth had rubbed open. If she didn't find a place to rest properly or a competent healer, she might bleed out or collapse from infection. Gritting her teeth, she pushed forward, reminding herself that she had faced worse hardships on the road in the north, or during her captivity. She would endure. As she passed under a crumbling archway, she noticed tattered posters plastered to the walls. Some were half torn, stained by rain. One fragment displayed the Lannister lion, accompanied by the words, "Wanted for treason." Another poster beneath it bore some semblance of a face, though it was too damaged to make out the details. She guessed the city was full of such notices, enemies of the crown or petty criminals. Perhaps soon her own face would adorn a new parchment, if it wasn't there already. She felt a chill run through her, hastening her steps. She turned a corner into a crowded street that led downhill toward Flea Bottom. The stench was immediate. Sour waste, rot, and sweat. The houses on either side leaned precariously, and the narrow walkway teemed with all manner of folk. Beggars, urchins, women with shawls, men in ragged cloaks. A swirl of movement and noise that could swallow a stranger whole. For once, Brienne was grateful for the chaos. It offered her anonymity if she navigated it carefully. She hunched her shoulders, doing her best to appear smaller, though her height was impossible to fully disguise. Now and then, passers-by spared her a curious glance, but no one challenged her. In Flea Bottom, survival was often the only concern, not minding a stranger's business. Her progress was slow. Jostling crowds bumped her injured arm, and every step ground her wounded leg. The morning sun rose higher, casting harsh light on the labyrinth of ramshackle structures. She paused near a corner where a group of filthy children clustered around a pot of something that steamed suspiciously, ladling it into wooden bowls. The sight made her stomach twist in hunger and revulsion. She forced herself onward. A short while later, she came upon a smithy, just a rickety open-air shop with an anvil and a forge that glowed a low orange in the dawnlight. A wiry man hammered at a bent piece of metal, presumably a pot rim or part of a hinge. He glanced at her briefly, eyes narrowing. She tensed, ready to flee if he recognized her or called for the watch. But he said nothing, returning to his task. The forging ring of his hammer set a rhythm that pulsed in the air, almost soothing in its familiarity. She thought of Gendry again. Perhaps he'd been forced to move his work elsewhere, or maybe he'd left the city long ago. The memory felt distant, a remnant of a simpler time that had never truly been simple. She had no reason to linger at the smithy, so she continued on. Gradually, the pressing crowds thinned as she wandered deeper into Fleabottom's maze of alleys. The ramshackle nature of the place meant entire clusters of dwellings sprouted at odd angles, with connecting walkways overhead and side passages that led to hidden courtyards. She tried to keep track of her direction, but more than once she realized she was heading in a circle or down a dead end. Tiredness gnawed at her, along with a persistent ache in her leg. If she didn't find respite or a physician soon, she might collapse in one of these filthy gutters. A voice called from behind, startling her. She turned, hand on the hilt of her sword beneath the shawl. An older woman with a deeply lined face stood in a doorway, wearing a threadbare cloak. She held out a wooden ladle filled with water. "You look half dead, stranger," the woman said in a low, husky tone. Her eyes flicked over Brienne's towering form with a mixture of caution and pity. "I've seen your kind before. Warriors who come stumbling through here with more wounds than sense." Brienne swallowed, tempted by the offer of water. "I have coin," she managed to say, her voice rasping. "I need some bandages. A place to rest. Then I'll go." "Dum, unten." The woman glanced warily at the alley, as if expecting soldiers. "No watchmen around right now. They come through sometimes, but not so early in the day. You best hurry if you want to hide." She nodded toward her doorway. "This isn't an inn, mind you. Just my home. But I can give you a cup of water and cloth enough to bind yourself if that's all you need." Brienne hesitated, uncertain if walking into a stranger's house was wise. But her fatigue and pain outweighed caution. She nodded gratefully. Thank you. I won't stay long." The woman shrugged. "Suit yourself. I'm Mabel." Without further ceremony she turned and hobbled inside. Brienne followed, ducking under the low lintel. The interior was dark and cramped. A single room separated by a tattered curtain that presumably hid a sleeping area. The smell was a mix of stale bread, old blankets, and damp. It wasn't pleasant, but it was better than lying unconscious in the gutter. Abel pointed to a rickety stool near a small table. Brienne lowered herself onto it, trying not to groan when her thigh flared with renewed pain. She watched warily as the older woman took a clay cup from a shelf and poured water from a chipped jug. The water looked clean enough, though it had a faint metallic scent. Brienne took it, sipping slowly. Abel tossed her a small scrap of cloth. "Used to be my apron. It's clean. Use it for bandages if you must." Brienne murmured her thanks, quickly rummaging in her pouch. She found a single copper left. She'd paid almost everything she had to the boy, and for her earlier lodging. A wave of dismay swept her as she realized how little she could offer. She placed the copper on the table, hoping it would suffice. Abel eyed it with mild disappointment, then sighed. "I can't be expecting more from a wounded stranger, can I? Some folk would have left you in the streets." Brienne dipped her head. "You have my gratitude. Gratitude doesn't fill bellies." The woman grumbled. But there was no malice in her voice. She crossed her arms, leaning against the crooked wall. "You want to tell me how you got so banged up, or is it best I don't know?" Brienne hesitated. Telling the truth was dangerous, but lies could be just as perilous. "It's best you don't know," she said quietly, sipping the water again. Fight in the keep. It didn't end well." Abel's mouth pressed into a thin line. She motioned to the ragged shawl that hid Brienne's face. "Judging by your size and them wounds, I guess you're no common brawler. You planning on skipping the city soon?" "That was my hope," Brienne muttered. "But the gates might be closed." Ebel shook her head. "Even if they weren't, you'd stand out like a giant among children. You best let yourself heal some, or you'll never make it to the gate." She stepped over to the curtain, rummaging for something. After a moment, she emerged with a small wooden box. Opening it, she revealed a cluster of dried herbs and a stoppered clay vial. "I ain't no maester, but I know a bit of healing. Got these from a hedge witch years back." She set them down. "Might help with fever or infection if you brew them properly." Suspicion flared in Brienne's mind, but she pushed it aside. This woman had no reason to poison her. "Thank you. You're being kind." Ebel snorted. "Don't make too much of it. I'll want that cloth back or payment for it if you ever find more coin." No one in Flea Bottom's exactly flush with generosity. Brienne allowed herself a tiny smile. "Understood." She peeled back the shawl and gingerly removed the blood-soaked bandage from her arm. Abel hissed at the sight of the ragged cut. "You'll need that cleaned. Got water enough, I suppose?" The older woman retrieved a small kettle, pouring water in. She set it by the hearth, where a smoldering pile of embers still lingered from the night's fire. "Give it a few minutes to warm. Then we'll rinse that wound and bandage it fresh. Same for your leg." "Neher." Brienne closed her eyes, overwhelmed by unexpected relief. After all the terror and violence of the previous night, the simple kindness of a stranger was almost too much to bear. She felt tears prick at the corner of her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I'll be gone soon," she repeated. Ebel shrugged. "I'd prefer it for my own safety. No offense, but you can't go hobbling about bleeding like that. You're liable to leave a red trail from here to the gate." Brienne sighed. She knew the woman was right. Still, time was a factor. If the watch discovered her location, she'd bring danger on Ebel as well. And the city was stirring more with each passing moment. She listened to the faint clamor outside, voices raised in argument, a distant cry of alarm, the rumble of cartwheels on stone. It was only a matter of time before the watch came sniffing around, especially if rumors led them to Flea Bottom. She adjusted on the stool, letting out a low groan. Her entire body ached, ribs, arms, leg, everything. She felt like she'd aged a decade in one night. The memory of Cersei's last moments flashed in her mind. The look of shock and rage in the queen's eyes, the warm spray of blood. A fresh wave of guilt mingled with grim conviction. Had she truly done the right thing? She might never be sure, but it no longer mattered. It was done. At last, the kettle began to steam. Ebel poured some of the hot water into a small bowl, then doused it with a measure of cooler water from the jug to keep it from scalding. She gestured for Brienne to extend her arm. With surprising gentleness, she dipped a rag into the bowl and began to clean the dried blood. Brienne sucked in a sharp breath as the warmth stung. But she grit her teeth, bearing it, grateful for Ebel's help. When the wound was as clean as could be managed, Ebel reached for the dried herbs, crushing them in her palm and mixing them with more water. A faint aroma of earth and bitter grass filled the tiny room. She spread the herbal paste onto the cut, then wrapped it with a strip of cloth. "It might sting. The mixture's meant to draw out the bad humors," she explained. "At least, that's what the hedge witch claimed. You can decide if it works or not." "Then..." Brienne nodded in thanks, then slowly lifted the hem of her tunic to expose her thigh wound. Ebel whistled low at the sight. "You're lucky you ain't bled to death already. That's a deep one." Brienne said nothing, letting the old woman do her work. She tried not to flinch as the water and herbs made contact. The throbbing intensified, but then the warmth dulled to a more tolerable ache. Once the bandages were in place, Ebel stepped back, surveying her handiwork with a critical eye. "That'll have to do. You need real rest, though. At least a day or two. Otherwise you'll split them open again." "No, Natam." Brienne let out a humorless laugh. "A day or two might be more than I have." Abel's expression tightened. "So it's that serious, is it?" She studied Brienne's face, noting the pale skin, the set of her jaw. "My guess Is the watches after you for something you did at the keep? Brienne hesitated, then inclined her head a fraction. Yes, best you don't ask more than that. Abel rubbed her temple. Well, as long as they don't burn my home for sheltering you. A day or two, that's all I can offer. After that, you're on your own. Oh. Understood. Brienne glanced around the cramped space. She spied a thin pallet on the floor near the hearth. It was even smaller than the one in the boarding house, but it was a place to lie down. Thank you, she said again, her voice soft. Abel only grunted. Don't think me a saint. If I hear so much as a whisper of the watch searching door to door, you'll have to leave that instant. That's fair. A sudden knock at the door made them both freeze. Brienne's heart lurched. Abel shot her a warning glare and held up a hand for silence. The old woman moved to the door, pressing her ear against it. From outside came a gruff male voice. Open up, Granny. Got a question for you. Brienne's pulse hammered. She glanced wildly around, searching for somewhere to hide. The room was too small for her to vanish completely. A curtain corner might suffice if she stayed still. She shuffled quickly behind it, biting back the hiss of pain as she hunched down, her bandaged leg protesting. The space behind the curtain was cramped with storage jars, piles of rags, and a battered chest. She crouched low, hand on Oathkeeper's hilt. If the visitor forced his way in, she might have to fight. She prayed it wouldn't come to that. Abel cleared her throat and slid the bolt on the door. Don't break it, I'm coming. She opened the door a crack. What do you want? Brienne strained to listen. The man's voice was muffled, but she caught snippets. Looking for a tall, armed fugitive. Some say a woman? Have you seen or heard anything suspicious? Abel huffed. I see a lot of suspicious folk. This is Flea Bottom after all. Don't get smart with me, the man growled. We're searching every hovel. Murder in the Red Keep last night. A knight or sellsword on the loose. Maybe more than one. If you have any information, speak up. Nimwen. Abel's voice dripped with sarcasm. Right, because we folk in Flea Bottom are always told the truth by them lords up in the keep. Could be a demon for all I care. Haven't seen anyone, and you want find demon or knight in my humble house. She let out a disdainful sniff. You want to check my chamber pot as well? Might find a clue there. The man let out a derisive snort. Watch your tongue. We'll be back if we hear anything to the contrary. Heavy footsteps retreated, and Abel shut the door with a sharp thud, bolting it again. Brienne exhaled shakily, relief flooding her limbs so suddenly that she nearly toppled forward. Abel turned, waving for her to emerge from behind the curtain. They'll be making their rounds all day, poking into every alley. If they get more men, they might do a thorough search of each building. I doubt they'll bother with mine first, but be on your guard. Brienne eased herself upright, gripping the wall for support. You risk a lot by letting me stay. Abel sniffed. Less risk than you think. Most watchmen won't care to force their way into a hovel for no reason. But you keep quiet. Don't let any of my neighbors see you if you can help it. She eyed Brienne's bandaged injuries. Get some rest while you can. Brienne nodded, sinking onto the pallet. Her body felt heavier than a boulder, exhaustion creeping in. She let her head rest against the wall, eyes half-lidded. Outside, she could hear the murmur of voices, the bark of dogs, the shuffle of footsteps on the muddy pathways. She wondered how many watch patrols were out there. How many men bristled at the chance to capture the killer knight. If they cornered her again, she wasn't certain she had the strength to fight. Time crawled by in that cramped one-room dwelling. Abel busied herself with small tasks. Sorting dried beans, mending a torn garment, occasionally stirring a thin pot of porridge over the embers. She hardly spoke, beyond a few grunts or muttered remarks about the noise outside. Brienne drifted in and out of a half-doze, jolted awake every so often by a stray shout or a clamor of footsteps near the door. Each time, her hand flew to her sword, but no one banged on the door again. Eventually, Abel ladled some of the porridge into a rough clay bowl and handed it to Brienne. It smelled faintly of onions and something sour. But hunger outweighed pickiness. Brienne ate in silence, the warm spoonful soothing her empty stomach. She remembered gentler days. shared meals with Podrick or the Starks, moments that felt like a lifetime ago. She pushed the memory away. Indulging in nostalgia would only sharpen the sense of loss. After she finished, Ebel took the bowl without comment. Brienne mustered the strength to thank her. The old woman's expression softened for a second. Then she resumed her gruff mien. "Just don't die on my floor," she muttered. "I've enough to clean up without your corpse." Brienne managed a faint smile. "I'll do my best." Her eyelids felt unbearably heavy again. The meager meal had sapped the last of her resolve to stay awake. She let herself sink sideways on the pallet, ignoring the twinge in her ribs, and exhaled. Outside, the light had grown brighter through the cracks in the walls, indicating midday was approaching. She drifted into a fitful sleep. In her dreams, she saw the throne room ablaze with wildfire, heard Cersei's mocking laughter echo off the stone columns. She ran forward, but her legs felt like lead, each step forcing her deeper into the green flames. Then she saw Sansa's face, pale and frightened, beckoning for help somewhere across the swirling inferno. She tried to call out, but no sound emerged. The laughter turned to screams, and she awoke with a gasp, drenched in sweat. Ebel had left the dwelling, or so it seemed. No sign of her in the small room. Brienne sat up, disoriented. The day's light had changed. Pale slants of late-afternoon sun now crept through the cracks. Her heart thudded from the lingering terror of the dream. She gingerly moved her injured arm. The bandage was crusted with dried herbs, but the throbbing had lessened. Her leg still hurt, though it felt marginally better. Ebel's rudimentary healing might be helping after all. A scuff at the door made her tense, but it was only Ebel returning. The old woman stepped inside, carrying a bundle of cloth and a stale loaf of bread. She locked the door behind her, exhaling sharply. "City's in an uproar," she said, setting the bread on the table. "Soldiers all over, watchmen. Folks being questioned. Word is the queen is definitely dead, found in her chambers with a sword through the chest. They say half her guards got butchered too." Brienne swallowed, feeling the ghosts of that frantic battle swirl in her memory. "And what does the city say?" Ebel gave a humorless laugh. "Every rumor under the sun. Some say Tyrion Lannister came back to avenge himself. Some claim it was a Braavosi sellsword, or a faceless man from the Free Cities. Others whisper about a monstrous woman in armor who can tear men's heads off with her bare hands." She arched an eyebrow. "That last one's a bit more accurate than they realize, eh?" Brienne looked away. "I didn't tear anyone's head off." "Right," Ebel deadpanned. "Well, in any case, if you're planning to slip out of the city, you'll need to wait until the watch isn't so thick. Right now they're patrolling every gate, searching wagons, checking faces. You might be able to slip past at night if you're lucky. And if you can ride." She gestured at Brienne's wounded leg. Brienne flexed her toes, testing the pain. "I can ride if I must. I had a horse last night, but I had to leave it behind. Perhaps I can find another." Ebel snorted. "All you can find in Fleabottom are lice-ridden mules and half-dead nags. You'd be better off stealing from a stable near the market, though that's sure to raise attention." She shrugged. "But I suspect you're no stranger to risk." Brienne's mind raced. She might have to take a desperate gamble. The alternative was to remain hidden here indefinitely, waiting for the watch to tighten the noose. That was no solution at all. She also couldn't ignore that her entire purpose, ensuring Sansa's safety, still weighed heavily on her. She needed to get a raven out or warn her directly, though she wasn't even certain where Sansa might be at present. The north? The Eyrie. The rumors placed her in the Vale, or beyond it. The city had been rife with speculation about Lady Stark's whereabouts. She tried to stand, using the wall for support. Ebel set down her bundle of cloth, which contained a small portion of dried beans and a few wrinkled apples. "You hungry again?" Brienne nodded. "A bit." "Thank you." Ebel passed her an apple, looking pensive. "I've been thinking, there's someone in Fleabottom who deals in information, knows all sorts of comings and goings, especially among the watch. If you want to time your escape right, he might help. For a price." Brienne frowned. "Who?" The old woman's expression soured, as though the thought tasted bitter. "A rat named Clio. He's a sly little weasel, but he has connections among petty thieves and watchmen alike. Likely can find you a route. Or warn you when the guard shifts at the gates. He'll want silver or gold though, and it sounds like you're short on coin. I have no coin, Brienne admitted, shifting uncomfortably. I gave my last copper to you. Ibel nodded, her jaw set. Then you'll have to offer something else. Maybe he'll take that sword of yours. Brienne stiffened. I won't part with Oathkeeper. The thought was unthinkable. It was more than a sword. It was a trust. A legacy. She shook her head vehemently. No, I can't. Abel's gaze flicked to the sword hilt beneath the shawl. Then you'd best think of another bargaining chip. Brienne sighed. I have none. If this Cleo won't deal without payment, I'll find another way. Abel studied her, then shrugged. Suit yourself. The man's foul enough to cheat you anyway. Might feed you false information, leave you in a worse scrape. Could be a trap if he sees the chance to earn coin by betraying you to the Watch. If you do go that route, step lightly. A chill settled in Brienne's stomach. She clenched a fist at the thought of more betrayal. The city was a web of shifting loyalties. She felt a pang of longing for simpler roads. For the open fields and forests, where an enemy at least faced you openly with steel. Here, danger lurked in half-lit rooms and whispered bargains. Still, she kept her face impassive. I'll keep my own counsel then. Ebel nodded, finishing her meager meal. There's a spare cloak in that chest behind the curtain if you want something a bit less ragged than the shawl. Though it might be dusty. Brienne inclined her head in thanks. I appreciate that. She moved stiffly toward the curtain, rummaging in the chest. Among old garments that smelled of moth and mold, she found a heavy brown cloak with frayed edges. It was large enough to drape over her frame. The weight of it felt a little like her own old traveling cloak from Tarth, though that one had been lost long ago. The memory of her father's hall, the sea breeze across the sapphire isle, stirred a pang of homesickness. She forced it aside. Pulling the cloak around her shoulders, she adjusted her sword so it was concealed underneath. She tested her range of motion, wincing as the leg wound twinned. This would have to do. She looked at Ebel, who watched her with hooded eyes. I'll be gone by tonight. You've helped me enough. Ebel exhaled, rummaging in a small satchel. She pulled out a few more of the dried herbs. Take these. Brew them if you can. They might keep the infection away. Brienne took them, pressing them carefully into a pouch at her belt. I'll repay you someday, if fate allows. Don't bother. Just go, and don't mention me to anyone. Brienne nodded. She settled back onto the pallet to wait for dusk, her mind churning with plans. Should she attempt the city gate or try the harbor? The harbor might be more strictly watched, but it offered a chance to slip onto a ship under cover of darkness. Then again, she had little coin to pay for passage. The gates offered the possibility of riding out with some merchant caravan or forging a path through less guarded roads. Neither option seemed safe, but she would decide soon. For now, she needed rest. As the afternoon waned, she half dozed again, lulled by the dull ache of her wounds and the low murmur of life outside. Ebel busied herself quietly, occasionally stepping out to check on something. Each time the door opened or closed, Brienne's nerves prickled, fearing the watch might barge in. But no sign of them came. The hours slipped by with agonizing slowness. At last, evening shadows lengthened across the walls, painting them in somber hues. Ebel lit a small tallow candle. The flickering light revealed the lines of worry on the old woman's face. She moved to the pallet where Brienne lay. You best go soon. The watch changes shifts a bit after sunset. Some get lax in the gloom. She paused, fiddling with a loose thread on her sleeve. I'd say you could stay another night, but that might be pushing my luck. Brienne understood. She rose, testing her leg carefully. The pain was still there, a dull throb, but at least the bleeding had stopped. She felt lightheaded from lack of proper nourishment, but she had enough strength to walk. Bidding Ebel farewell felt strange. This woman had shown her more mercy than most in this city. She wished she had more to offer in return. Ebel opened the door a crack, peering out. Looks clear. she muttered. "Go on." Brienne stepped into the alley. The air was crisp with the onset of night, and a thin moon hung in the sky. Torches glimmered in the distance, marking watch patrols or the occasional open shop. She turned to Ebel once more, attempting a grateful nod. "You saved me. I won't forget it." Abel merely waved a hand as though brushing off the sentiment. "Go, before I regret it." Brienne slipped away, pulling the hood of the cloak low over her face. She kept close to the walls, skirting puddles and refuse. The city's nighttime hush was deceptive. Behind closed doors, men plotted, laughed, or drank themselves to oblivion. Lanterns hung from a few doorways, illuminating patches of the muddy ground. She passed small clusters of beggars huddling against each other for warmth. Their eyes tracked her movement, but none attempted to stop her. At a corner, she spotted a watch patrol heading in her direction. A pair of guards in battered armor, gold cloaks swaying in the torchlight. Fear jolted her. She turned down a side alley, heart pounding, searching for a way to circle around. She found herself in a cramped passage reeking of rotted fish. The walls of leaning shacks practically touched overhead, blotting out the sky. She trod carefully, ignoring the complaints of her leg. At one juncture, she heard voices echoing from a courtyard. She paused, pressing against the wall, waiting until the voices died down, then continued. Her sense of direction told her she was heading vaguely south, away from the Red Keep's looming silhouette. She had to reach one of the southwestern gates or a path to the harbor. The city's walls were formidable, but smaller posterns might offer a chance of slipping out. She trudged onward, keeping a wary eye on any movement. Once, she glimpsed a group of watchmen in the distance, their torches bright against the darkness. She ducked behind a broken cart until they passed. The roads grew wider as she neared a marketplace, an open square that by day would be bustling with vendors, but now it was mostly deserted, save for a few late lingerers. She heard raucous laughter from a nearby tavern, its windows glowing with lantern light. A donkey brayed from a tether post. The stench of stale produce lingered where market stalls stood empty, the wooden frames creaking in the wind. This route might be risky, but if she skirted the edges of the square, she could find a main road that led to the gate. She stepped carefully, scanning for watchmen. 2 city guards stood near a closed stall, apparently chatting with a woman in a bright green shawl who laughed coquettishly. Their attention, at least, was on her. Hoping to avoid them, Brienne moved along the opposite side, hugging the shadows of an old well. Her heart hammered with each footstep. The guards were only a stone's throw away. If one of them glanced in her direction, the light from their torches might reveal the dried blood on her boots, or the shape of the sword beneath the cloak. She crept past, grateful that the woman seemed intent on captivating their attention. Once she reached the far end of the square, she slipped down a quiet lane. Ahead, through the gloom, she could see part of the city wall rising high. If she followed it, she might come upon a postern gate. The idea lifted her spirits slightly. But she was not the only one who favored that lonely stretch of wall. As she drew nearer, she spotted another patrol. A group of 4 men, heavily armed, standing at the mouth of an archway that likely led to the smaller gate. They stood in a half-circle, torches planted in iron holders, conversing with low intensity. Brienne's stomach sank. That gate was guarded, and with 4 men, there was little chance to bluff her way through without showing her face. She considered a direct approach, but the risk was immense. Fighting 4 guards in her condition could be her end. She withdrew, turning instead to follow the wall in the other direction. Perhaps there was a darker, more neglected stretch she could climb or circumvent. She recalled hearing stories of smugglers who used hidden passages in the city walls. If only she had time to track such rumors. She walked for nearly a quarter hour along the dimly lit perimeter, searching for any sign of an unguarded door or a decrepit section that could be scaled. The stone ramparts were tall and well-maintained here, and she saw no easy footholds. Now and then, she passed watchtowers that flickered with faint torchlight. The air tasted of salt drifting in from Blackwater Bay. She realized she might be nearing the southwestern corner of the city, not far from the mud gate, which opened onto the bay. That area had once been ravaged by wildfire during Stannis' siege, if she remembered correctly, and repairs might have left weaknesses. Perhaps that was her best chance. She turned onto a broader thoroughfare, careful to keep to the shadows. Ahead the walls curved, and she heard the distant cry of gulls. The mud gate was known for being a place where fishermen and lesser merchant vessels unloaded. At this hour, it might be closed tight, with watchmen posted. But the scuttling trades and bribes of dock workers sometimes continued through the night. If she could find a gap in their vigilance, or bribe a boat to ferry her away. Her thoughts were interrupted by a flicker of movement to her left. She froze. In a recessed doorway, a cloaked figure stood. The faint light of a nearby torch caught the gleam of eyes beneath a hood. She instinctively grabbed her sword hilt, her heart pounding. The figure raised both hands in a pacifying gesture. "Easy," a voice whispered, husky and low. "I mean you no harm." She kept her hand on Oathkeeper. "Then don't step from the shadows like a footpad." A soft chuckle. "True enough. But I recognized you, sir, or is it my lady? Hard to tell in that cloak. I saw you slip away from the market earlier. You move well for someone bearing injuries." Alarm bells rang in her mind. Was this a trap? She couldn't risk letting the watch overhear. She moved a step closer, scanning the alley. "Who are you?" she demanded quietly. A slow tilt of the figure's head. "One who might help you, if you have reason enough to trust me." Brienne hesitated, tension thrumming in her limbs. She almost lunged, but curiosity held her in check. "Why would you help me?" The figure sighed softly. "Because the city is a nest of vultures tonight. And you seem like the biggest target. Rumors swirl that the queen is dead, and the killer is at large. Men are out for blood. Some for vengeance, some for coin. No matter your reasons, you won't survive the night if you try the main gates." "One." Brienne's pulse hammered. "That doesn't answer my question." "Why you?" "Because I have a boat. I can row you across the bay, away from the city walls. After that, your fate is your own." The figure stepped forward just enough that Brienne could see the outline of a face. Sharp angles, a faint scar across the jaw. A woman, perhaps in her 30s, eyes narrowed with cautious intelligence. "You can refuse, of course. But I suspect you'd do better with me than on your own." "Dan Simpa." Brienne's grip on the sword did not lessen. "And what do you want in return?" The woman gave a small, thin-lipped smile. "I'm no saint either. I've debts, and I'd like coin. But I can see you have none, so perhaps a favor, or a promise that if we meet again in gentler times, you'll remember me. There's value in owing a favor to a knight, especially one rumored to have ended a queen's reign." Brienne's mouth felt dry. She considered the risk. This could be a ruse, luring her to a lonely dock where watchmen waited. Yet the city offered no easy path. "I'm not in the habit of making deals with strangers. I suspect you're not in the habit of murder either. Yet here we are." The woman's voice was calm, lacking malice. "Desperate times, desperate deeds. Decide quickly, or the watch will do the deciding for you." Brienne searched the woman's face in the flickering torchlight. There was a certain unwavering steadiness in her eyes, not the gleam of a typical cutthroat. It was a gamble, but every path was a gamble now. She exhaled, the ache in her leg warning that she couldn't outrun guards forever. Perhaps the gods were offering her a slim thread of salvation. "Very well," she said quietly. "I accept your help, but if you betray me..." The woman raised a hand. "You'll kill me, yes. I don't doubt it. Now come on. We should move before we draw unwanted attention." They slipped deeper into the alley, guided by the woman's sure steps. Brienne kept alert, scanning for any sign of a hidden ambush. The woman led her through winding back streets, past broken fences and dilapidated outbuildings, heading ever closer to the smell of salt water. A hush lay over this quarter, the bustle of the city seeming distant. Now and then, a flicker of torchlight would force them to duck behind crates or press against a wall until a patrol's footsteps receded. At last, they emerged near a rickety wharf that jutted into the waters of Blackwater Bay. The moon's reflection shimmered on the dark surface. A few small boats bobbed, tied to warped pilings. The tang of fish and seaweed permeated the air. A single lantern burned near the corner of a rotting warehouse, revealing patches of old nets and rusted hooks. The woman pointed to a modest skiff, nothing more than a rowboat with a sail rolled up along the side. There, quietly now. She moved ahead, loosening the rope that secured the boat. Brienne followed, her nerves on edge. Each creak of the wharf boards felt deafening in the silence. She expected at any moment to hear a shout or the clank of watch armor. But the bay remained eerily still. Only the soft lap of water and the faint hiss of wind. When they reached the skiff, the woman gestured for Brienne to step in. The boat rocked under her weight, and she had to grip the gunwale to keep steady, her leg throbbing. The woman climbed in after her, dropping the small satchel near the stern. She unwrapped the oars, giving a glance over her shoulder. "If all goes well, we'll row a mile or so along the shoreline, then hoist the sail if the wind is fair. You can lie low. I'll do the rowing until it's safe." Brienne swallowed, adjusting her cloak and sword so they wouldn't catch on the boat's edges. Her heart pounded with a mixture of relief and dread. She felt exposed, but also as though she was finally slipping beyond the city's grasp. She glanced back at the walls of King's Landing, rising darkly against the sky. Somewhere behind those ramparts, men raged over the death of their queen. Somewhere, a small group of innocents might be safer for Cersei's absence. Somewhere, Jaime Lannister might be learning that his sister was gone, wrestling with the tragedy in his own way. The realm teetered on the brink of new chaos, and Brienne could only pray that her actions had not doomed it further. A faint splash disrupted her thoughts. The woman had dipped the oars into the water, propelling the skiff away from the wharf. Brienne felt the gentle roll of the bay. She realized she never asked the woman's name. Perhaps that was for the best. If fortune favored her, she would sail away into the night, find a path to the north or the Vale, and warn Sansa of any lingering dangers. If fortune turned cruel, this boat might become her grave. She bowed her head, letting the briny wind brush her cheek. Her wounds pulsed, a reminder of the cost she had paid and might still pay. But for now, she was free of the Red Keep's walls, free of the city's labyrinth, floating on dark waters, with only a stranger's murky promise to guide her. The memory of Cersei's lifeless eyes clung to her, a burden she would carry forward. The skiff glided further from shore, the lights of King's Landing shrinking behind them. Brienne inhaled slowly, tasting salt and freedom on her lips. As the boat rocked gently beneath her, she wondered what the next dawn would bring, and whether she would live to see it. One thing was certain, she had no choice but to press on, for the sake of the promises she had made and the honor she still strove to uphold. Far behind, in the labyrinth of the city, horns blew and men shouted, but their voices faded to silence over the waters. Brienne kept her eyes on the horizon, each stroke of the oars carrying her toward a future as shadowed and uncertain as the night around her. Yet in that uncertainty lay a flicker of hope, hope that she might atone for the blood spilled and protect the innocent who still relied on her vow, even if they never knew the lengths to which she had gone to honor it.